Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. With me, as always, is Brian Driscoll. He is the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And it is Friday, which means it is a Friday free-for-all mailbag. And I love this day. It's my favorite day of the week. I don't know if anybody realizes that or not, but
you might have mentioned it once or twice.
Yeah, I thought I might, but for all the newbies in the house, I'm going to make sure I get that out there. Couple things before we jump into all of our listener/watcher questions, Brian. We got a programming note. Mm-hmm. Tomorrow, you and Sean are going to have a podcast at 1 o'clock Eastern time. Mm-hmm. 1 o'clock Eastern time. And you are going to talk about the new hires, the press conference that took place a couple days ago, things like that, right?
We're going to it's going to be sort of twofold. We're going to give our impressions of the press conference, things we learned, because Sean was there covering it for Irish Breakdown.
That he was.
And so we'll get his thoughts on everything. And then we're going to go through the bigger part of the show is going to be kind of taking the 7 new assistants, the new coaches, and ranking them from, sort of the easiest task, most important task, to who has the hardest job initially, like just for 2022, not long term, but just who has the toughest task in 2022, and then sort of what are the things each of those coaches have to really focus on getting going in 2022. So it's going to be a fun show. And we've talked a lot about just it's kind of funny, like at first it was going to be like 3 or 4 new coaches, then 5, then 6, then 7, and it's like next thing you know, Marcus Freeman's completely overhauling the program. And that means there's going to be a lot more questions because there's a lot more coaches that we know what they've done at other places. We don't know what they've done at Notre Dame. So it's going to be a fun discussion. It's like Sean and I decided to do it like Tuesday, like Monday or Tuesday. And it was like, yeah, now we're just the anticipation of it. So we're just like chomping at the bit to talk about this. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Excellent. And that's part of our new Saturday afternoon show that we're going to be doing every Saturday. Sean and I are going to, mostly it'll be Sean and I. Sometimes I may need someone to fill in. He may need someone to fill in, but the plan is for it to mainly be Sean and I to just pick some kind of topic that we're going to discuss. Sometimes we'll agree. Sometimes we may not agree, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
There was also a little bit of breaking news today, Brian, that I want to touch on before we jump into the questions. The College Football Playoff Committee has announced that there will be no changes over the length of the current contract, which I believe goes to 2026. Does that sound accurate?
Well, through 2025, so you can't have a change until 2026. Basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but that would be like January of 2026, right?
Right. So after the 2025 season is over, that's when the contract is basically up. Now, I would imagine before then they'll have something worked out as far as what they're going to go to next. But based on the timelines and the things that have gone through, it's a situation where they can't make a change now at this point in time.
Right. And so what are your thoughts on that? Because for a while there, it felt like change was coming, like it was going to happen. And, there was the Swarbrick proposal that we hashed out, and just then talked about and all that. And now nothing. So what are your thoughts on, first of all, the fact that now there is nothing, and how does it affect Notre Dame?
Well, the interesting thing is the proposal, I think, would have passed if it wasn't for Texas and Oklahoma leaving the SEC, leaving the Big 12 for the SEC. And the reason I say that is at that point in time, the only hurdle would have been the money. And the money was basically tied into different different TV deals and things like that, and wanting to get more involved, which I think it's a little, it's just typical college football stuff, right? It's about how can we make the most money, right? I think that if that's all they had to worry about, that would have been it. What Texas and Oklahoma did by leaving for the SEC is that sort of allowed people that had some reservations that would have maybe otherwise voted for it to sit back and say, hold on a second, now we have all these other issues we have to discuss. And I think that allowed for a lot more things to get lobbed in, like NIL and transfer portal and, player safety. And, now there's just like, okay, now I have a ability to make my voice heard because there was wide acceptance of the 12-team proposal at first. And I think there'd have been some people pressured into it because I believe it had to be a unanimous vote to change it early. Now, the thing that's interesting is the people that kind of wanted to get things accomplished in this deal that didn't, they could be in trouble now because when the new thing happens, there doesn't have to be a unanimous vote the next time. So what are we going to do after the contract is over? There does not have to be unanimous vote on that. There needed to be unanimous vote. My understanding is to change the current contract and get out early.
Gotcha.
And make the moves early. Because the original thought was maybe this could go into effect before the other contract was up. And so I think that's where it was interesting. So that was kind of the change. And so now for the 22, 23, 24, and 25 seasons, so the next 4 seasons, it's still going to be a 4-team playoff, which I know a lot of Notre Dame fans have some strong feelings about that.
Well,
in both directions.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to share our feelings about that, or do we want to do a special show on that?
Because we do both.
Yeah. Fair enough. Look, I don't have this as an issue. I think it depends on the year, to be perfectly honest with you. Sometimes a 14 playoff is more than enough because those teams that are 5, 6, 7 have no business being in the college football playoff. This past year, I would have liked a bigger field because I think there was so much parity this year.
Which we talked about before the season.
Exactly. And that's why we thought Notre Dame had an opportunity to do something special this year. Not because Notre Dame was going to be amazing.
Right. I mean, this was not Notre Dame's best team the last 5 years, but it was the combination of all the factors could have given Notre Dame a chance if they would have done things.
And it played out that way. I mean, I think we could have had a very entertaining 8 to 12 team playoff this year. Not more 8 to 10 maybe, but still, I think that would have been very entertaining this year. There are other years where that would be like the first round of the NFL playoffs, like blowouts all over the place. Why are we wasting our time with this? Like that kind of a thing. But I think this year, you could have seen a Utah, for example, make some noise, at the end of the year.
Sure.
You could have seen some teams do some stuff. And I think that would have been exciting. And since Notre Dame was on the outside looking in, obviously I'm going to say Notre Dame could have made some noise because I do think they could have. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it just depends on the year. Now, you can't put a contract together and be like, well, this year we're going to have 8. But next year, this year we're going to have 4. Obviously, you can't do that. That's not an ideal situation.
You have to set the number.
You got to set the number. And so I guess I'm in favor of expansion to a degree as long as it's done correctly. But I'm fine with 4. I'm fine with that because rarely are there more than 4 teams that deserve to be there. And so
rarely have there been 4 teams that deserve to be there.
Absolutely.
I think the first playoff year you had 4 that deserved to be there. I think Bama deserved to be there. I think Ohio State deserved. Matter of fact, I think that was a year where there were 6 teams that deserved to be there because you had the 4 that made it. Bama, you had Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, and Florida State. Now, Florida State wasn't a great team that year, but they ran the table and they were the defending champs. I also think TCU and Baylor were 2 really good football teams that year. Then 2015, it was maybe 3. It was Oklahoma, Clemson, Bama. Michigan State had no business being in the college football playoffs.
Absolutely agree.
As far as they deserve to be in based on the 14 rule. But what I'm saying is there was a big gap between them and the top 3. 2016, same situation with Washington. 2017, I felt the number 1 seed didn't belong in there, and that was Clemson. Like that was not a very good Clemson team. That was another down year in college football. Where you had people arguing that an 11-2 Ohio State team that lost by 31, 30-some points to Iowa should have been in the playoffs that year. Like that's how bad the field was that year. 2018, I think it was a good 14 field. That was a year where you had more than 4 that had an argument. You had 12-1 Ohio State that had an argument. Georgia was a 2-loss team that people were trying to argue should have been, which I thought was absurd. I thought you had 5 good teams that year. Definitely not 8. 2019, again, not a great field. I think it was to me that year it was I mean, you could make a case that in 2019 it was a 3-team field, right? I mean, Ohio State, Clemson, and LSU were about it. I mean, there was a big drop-off between those 3 in Oklahoma.
Sure.
right? And we saw that when LSU played Oklahoma. They could have hung 90 points on I'm not joking.
Right. No, I know you're not.
Like they hung 60-something on them,
Yeah.
and they've called off the dogs in the second quarter. They could have hung 90 on Oklahoma in that game. 2020, again, that was the Notre Dame team that made it in 2020, in my opinion, was not as good as several Notre Dame teams that didn't make it in past years. That's just it wasn't a great field. It was Alabama, and then a big drop off between Clemson and Clemson and Ohio State. I don't want to talk too much about that because it's a weird COVID year. I mean, a lot of things will happen.
Yeah.
And then this year, I thought there was really, to me, as I look at like two teams that really just, yes, that's a playoff team.
Yeah.
And you're not going to like this, Vince, but one of them was Michigan because based on their resume, Michigan handled their business.
That's fine.
Dominated Ohio State, dominated Iowa. They handled their business to get. They were.
I can look at it objectively. I can do that. I'm a big boy. I can do that.
But the fact that Michigan team was a no-brainer 1 or 2 seed says a lot about how bad college football was.
Exactly.
That's the thing that I'll say.
Exactly.
And so it was one of those down years that happens every 4 or 5 years, like 2017, 2021. Where you could make a case for more teams, but when you're making a case for more teams, it's normally because there aren't a lot of great teams. It's never like, wow, there's like 9 teams that can go win a title.
Exactly. There's parity.
And that's never been true.
Parity. Yeah.
That's never been true. I mean, I did a study on this just kind of for fun one time, when we were having this conversation. And I remember going back to, the year that Notre Dame made the playoff in 1988, because, like people are complaining about, there's no parity and all this other kind of stuff. And, I looked at it and I was like, look, this has always been true. And it's like there was I think 11 different teams won a title in the last however many years or played in the playoff. But I went back 11, and then I went back from 88 to 93 when Notre Dame was good and looked at just the top 4 rankings at the end of the year. And it would have only been 14 different teams would have made the playoff because you still had Miami every year would have been in it. Notre Dame would have been in it almost every year. Florida State would have been in it a bunch of years. Alabama would have been in it several years because they had a couple good teams during then. Of course, one of them won a title during that stretch with Eric Curry and John Copeland, that really good defense that they had, George Teague. And there was not a ton of parity back then either. Or you know what I mean? College football has always been sort of top heavy. Michigan would have made several playoff runs back then. If you remember, Michigan had some really good teams. Michigan was the best team in the Big Ten back then. There wasn't a lot of parity back then either, and then there's a lot of teams that wouldn't have deserved to be in it back then either. And, it's a frustrating debate, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to money. But I think the bigger thing for me is there's this thought that, the 14 playoff isn't good for Notre Dame because they have to go undefeated. That should be gone now because Notre Dame has made the playoff as a team with a loss. I also think that the other part of it for me, Vince, is there have been 2 other seasons where if Notre Dame would have just handled their business in November with a loss, they'd have been in. 15 and 17. And handling business means not just beating Stanford in 2015, but whooping Wake Forest and Boston College like you should have.
Right.
If you whoop those 2 bad teams like you should have, Oklahoma doesn't pass you. Right. And then you go out on the road and you beat a top 5 standard team, you definitely don't get passed by Oklahoma.
Right.
And same with 17. You beat Miami and Stanford at the end of the year, Notre Dame's in. Right. And so with a loss.
Yeah,
exactly.
Loss,
by the way.
Exactly. Yes.
And so I just don't buy into this notion that
Notre Dame's going to be in the conversation, especially with the schedule that they've got coming up
because
over
it's
the next few years. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. They're going to be in the conversation even with an early loss. Right. And so I have no doubt that will be the case. And they, again, until Notre Dame is forced to be in a conference championship because of inclusion into the playoff, they're going to be just fine. And they're going to be sailing right along with the way that they're doing things. And that's just the way it is, Right. So, yeah, nothing changes for me as far as Notre Dame's inclusion into the playoff. If they handle their business, they do what they're supposed to do, they're going to be involved. If they're a good team, I mean, plain and simple, right?
Well, and then like a comment like this, like Tyler Bedwell, and I think Tyler's trying to make a good faith argument here. And he says, I think playoff expansion will ultimately spread the top end talent across the country. It has become so singular where the top town is picking the same 4 or 5 schools. Again, always been true. That's always, and it's cyclical. Like every 5 or 6 years,
and that's the key.
6 years ago, Georgia wasn't recruiting like they are now. Kirby came in and changed that, right?
Right.
Like that's I mean, there was a stretch where Notre Dame just dominated recruiting every year from like 87 to like 92. Notre Dame just dominated recruiting every year. Miami dominated recruiting. Florida State dominated recruiting. So that's always been true. And kids aren't picking schools based mostly off playoff appearances. They're picking it off NFL and championships and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So, if you're a team that's getting in every year as the 8 or 9 seed and you're getting your brains bitten in the first round, that's not going to all of a sudden say, I'm going to go to Pitt because they get in every year and get crushed. So I'm going to go to Pitt instead of going to Notre Dame. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I don't think it moves the needle at all. Because the reason I say that, Tyler, is because I don't think expanding the playoff truly increases the number of teams that actually have a shot to win it.
I agree as well.
That it's not like college basketball.
Oh, and even college basketball to a degree, just because a team makes the the March Madness every year, right? Because there's 68 teams that make March Madness, and there's perennial teams that make it every year. Okay, for example, I'll just throw it out there. Like Wichita State, for example. They're always the darling in the tournament, right? The big-name players aren't going to Wichita State because they're in the tournament every year, right?
No, the closest thing you could argue is Gonzaga, but Gonzaga's been good for like 30 years.
Yes, absolutely.
And they're just now starting to get some of those
big guys,
big-name players in the last like 6-7
right.
years. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And like Loyola Chicago didn't all of a sudden start getting – 5-star players or top 100
because
players
they made a run or two
because they went to the Final Four,
right?
And it's just not the way that it works.
Correct.
If you prove yourself capable over a period of time, that's when you can start moving the needle from a recruiting standpoint. Like, the first time Notre Dame makes it, then that moves the needle because Notre Dame's a big time program.
Sure.
It's not going to turn Kentucky into a perennial contender because now all of a sudden there's college football playoff expansion, and they're just going to start getting all these much, much better players beating Bama for guys. It's not the way that works. It's for Notre Dame, it's about winning, handle your business, and Notre Dame gets in, and that's at the end of the day and again I like where Tyler's coming from.
As do I.
Because I think his head's in the right place. I don't like parity.
Well,
I like here's the reason I don't like parity. Parity is forced, in my opinion. Salary caps, draft order for the best teams, worst teams, the best teams. What I like is creating a playing field that if you're willing to do the work, you can be successful. And to me, when college football has become just so much about who has the most money, and then you create rules like the way that the playoffs are, the transfer rule, the NIL, you're making it far less of an even playing field. So, like, to me, the thing I don't like is because I feel like parity, like in professional sports, Vince, when you think of parity, it's you're punishing the teams that have had success.
Yes, that's not how I look at parity. That wasn't my definition of parity.
Right.
Mine is I like to see some other teams in there. I like more. You know what I mean? That's what I see as parity. I see what you're saying. What I want is a product of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to say that? You know what I mean?
Yes.
I like having more teams and more names out there.
I like having more competitive games in the regular season.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at some all 22 of Ohio State, and I'm just looking at their margin of victory last year, and it's just like they played no good games.
Right.
And because there's a big drop off between the haves and the have-nots, and
no question.
Because there's so much more money involved in it now. And so to me, it's about let's try to find some ways to even the playing field that way, as opposed to doing things that are going to hurt the best teams. Like people talked about, coming up with coaching salary caps. Like, why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, don't. I don't think that's the answer. That's not going to change anything. And I think that the 12 and the thing I like about the 12-team playoff compared to 8, I'm anti-8, is because number one, let's get away from anything beyond 4. Expanding the number of teams that can win a championship. Okay, again, this isn't college basketball. The number 9 seed's not going to go make a run to the championship game.
Right, it's just not going to happen.
It doesn't happen in college football. Rarely will you see that. I think I'd say in the last 10 years, there's one team that I thought would have entered as an 8 or 9 seed and made a run, and honestly, that was USC in 2016. But they made remember they started off 1-3. And made a quarterback change to Sam Darnold. By the end of the year, that was as good a team as anybody. Just about. That's about the only exception to that, right? Like, and you're always going to have that occasional exception.
Absolutely.
But that occasional exception isn't worth expanding to the playoff. You're expanding the playoff to create more opportunities to play on a big stage, not to compete for a championship.
Right.
Let's
Well, it's
be
like
honest.
I said,
So
for the example that I used with Utah, right? This
Right.
past year, would they have made some noise?
they might
Yes.
have won a game.
Do I
Yeah.
think that they would have won the championship? No,
Right.
I
Won
don't
3
think that.
games?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
No.
That's what I'm saying.
So
like
that's
yeah.
what I like 12/8, because
Right,
if you're gonna
right.
give more teams a chance to play on a big stage, let's really go in and go 12. You start going to 16 and you really cheapen it like that. Like, so there's a happy medium to it.
Right.
I still contend that the best way to make the whole game better is my proposal, which is get rid of the college football playoff tie-ins to the regular season and bowl games. Have the regular season and the conference championship games be about who gets into what conference bowl game. And then after the bowl games, you pick your 4. I still say that's the best way to do it, where you win your goal. If you're Ohio State, you have one goal: get to the Rose Bowl. Because if you don't get to the Rose Bowl, it's going to be really hard for you to get in the playoff.
Sure.
Right? And so you get back to having that pride in playing in the Rose Bowl. Right? If you're in the SEC, it's getting back to playing in the Orange Bowl. Give your guys something more to play beyond just a championship. I think those are the things. And then you start getting into some of these 8, 9 seed teams, Vince, that, like you said about Utah, I think this is where a Utah example is great.
Yeah.
Because Utah doesn't have a chance to go from like 9-4 with a win over Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. But what they can do is knock Ohio State out. And so what that does too is you have more teams with a chance to finish the season with a win.
Right.
That's the thing I hate about the 12-team playoff is 11 teams that were really good this year are going to end their season with a loss.
Yeah.
And I don't like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas in a bowl system,
we've talked about that a lot.
Half the teams in that bowl game are gonna win, a game, and then some of them are gonna win and not make it. So you have a chance for more teams to do it. So for me, I think there's a lot. My small, sliver of hope is that now that there's 5 seasons before this changes, I think is maybe there's a small glimmer of hope that we finally get some leadership in place that cares about making the game better as opposed to how can we make the absolute most money. That would be nice. I don't think it's going to happen, but at least there's a greater sliver of hope for that now than there was 2 months ago when it was, because once you expand to 12, there's no shrinking. There's no going back to that, right? That's my thing. It's like you're never going to get rid of a playoff. It just makes too much money. So how can we make the playoff better to where, we get back to a regular season that matters. Encourage teams to do stronger schedules, Don't count FCS games towards your resume. There's all types of things you could do to encourage that I think I would love to see the focus be on over the college football playoff. So anyway, that's enough of that for now. We had a great talk about that. I know there's a lot of questions.
There are a ton, and we're going to start with a couple super chats here, Brian. Here we go from Toe Jam right off the bat. Excuse me. Thank you, Toe Jam. It says, Happy Friday, Brian and Vince. With BK's proclivity for turning purple along with the purple colors of LSU, what character do you think best represents Brian Kelly? Grimace, Barney, or the purple Teletubby?
That is so mean.
I don't even know where to start. Like, we talking like personality or just the look
I'd probably
in
go
general?
Teletubby because the Teletubbies are small and short.
Ooh. I'm just gonna let that one slide. That's good. It's well done. It's well done.
You got to give an answer, Vince.
I hate Barney for so many reasons.
Yeah, that's right. You have children,
so I'm going with Barney.
Okay. I see what you did there. I see what you did there.
Yeah, I did. Jeffrey Joseph, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate that. Let's see. AST 12321. Thank you for the super chat. If Dante said he was going to make a decision tomorrow, do you think Indy would have better than a 50-50 chance to be the choice? Do you want me to save that for?
No, it's an easy answer. Yes,
I think it is. Yes, as well.
I've been very. This has been my opinion for a long time. I think Notre Dame's in a much better chance to get Dante than people think. Now it's about closing, and that's what I'm unsure of. Can they close? That's the uncertainty,
right?
But there's never been a doubt in my mind that Notre Dame has been in a great position for him.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. One more super chat, and then we will run into the others. Michael S., thank you very much. Isn't Rick Minter a better comparison to Golden? He had success at Notre Dame, got a head coaching job at Cincinnati, failed, returned to Notre Dame as defensive coordinator for Weiss, and failed. Minter equals Golden.
Yeah, I don't really think Rick Minter had a lot of success at Notre Dame, to be complete. I mean, he was part of some good teams, but no, I don't think Rick Minter is a comparison at all. I think number one, when you look at Rick Minter, his first stint at Notre Dame was 92 and 93. He inherited some pretty good situations. His task was don't screw it up.
Yeah.
Right. And I know a lot of people that would say, the job that Rick Minter did in 1992 was not great. They weren't as good as they should have been on off defense. I mean, they gave up 31 points in a win over Michigan State, gave up 33 points in a home loss to Stanford. I don't know if that team was necessarily loaded. And I know a lot of people that look at that 1993 team and say that team didn't achieve the success it should have on defense either, especially when you look at the Boston College game. Got completely outcoached by Tom Coughlin and his staff in that game against Boston College. So, and the other thing too is he didn't really have success at Cincinnati. Where I look at the success that Ralph Golden had at Temple, and that was impressive what he did there. And Miami's just a different situation. But no, I don't think that's a fair comparison at all. At all.
Scott Yerbick, question: which coaching new hire do you think will have the biggest impact on the team? Well, for me, it's Harry Hiestand. I mean, that's the biggest one for me. I could make an argument for maybe a Chancey Stuckey. That I could make that argument.
But I think you're right, Vince, is he said biggest impact on the team.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So it's not that position, it's that team. And there's no position on offense other than quarterback that has a bigger impact on the team than the offensive line. And as we've seen in the past, the offensive line can make the defensive line better too with that battle. So I think you're absolutely right, Vince. I think because, again, it's specific to answering the question.
Yeah, good point.
Right?
Yeah, no, when you frame it that way, which is yeah, that's absolutely.
Well, that was your instinct.
Yeah,
that's kind of I think you immediately went to.
Yeah,
Harry.
Absolutely, because he affects the run game, it affects the passing game, it affects the defensive line, like you mentioned.
It affects the demeanor of your football team.
Absolutely. When you've got an offensive line that is just mean in a good way, okay? I want people to understand that. But when they're just nasty and they're mean, it rubs off on the team, I'm telling you. And it gets running backs fired up to run behind them, and it just all of the above. So, yeah, it's definitely Harry Hiestand for me. Guinea Pig Clips. What is
some of these names are so great.
People are getting real creative. I will give them that. What is Marcus Freeman's floor in 2022? That's a really good question.
Yeah, I think when I look at the schedule, I'd say the floor is 9-3.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Okay. Yeah.
Well, you asked. You said it in a way of asking and then pause, which gave me a chance to ask.
I wanted you to answer first. I was just hoping we'd be different. That's all. But yeah, 9-3 is the floor for me.
People think that you agree with me because I bully you into agreeing with me. No, Vince and I have been friends long enough. Part of the reason we became friends is because we see eye to eye on a lot of things.
Right.
So,
but yes, no, I agree with you. I think that's the floor. I hope that's the floor of some, but again, a million things can happen that are out of market.
What that would mean is you lose to the two best teams on your schedule, right? Ohio State and Clemson.
Right.
And then you drop a USC or a BYU or something. I mean, so basically, to me, I look at there's 4 games that I say are kind of somewhat concerning for me, and it's Ohio State, BYU, Clemson, and USC.
Yeah.
You can maybe talk about North Carolina, but I mean, if you lose to North Carolina, there's some problems.
Yeah, because we've talked about North Carolina a lot over the past 2 years, and Notre Dame has their number. I'll just say it. I mean,
their talent levels going down.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And
they did make a new defensive coordinator hire, which is
important for them,
right? But I don't know if Gene Chizik is like that huge upgrade over Jay Bateman, but
yeah,
but essentially 9-3 is you go 1-3 against those teams, or you go 2-2 against those teams, which isn't great. And you have an upset somewhere.
Yeah.
North Carolina, right? Like that's where or BC at home or something like that is where you have that upset. But I think the top of the schedule's tougher than it's been in years.
Sure.
There's still a lot of
bottom
wins
feeders
on the schedule.
Bottom feeders is mean.
Right.
Wins, I like that.
There's a lot of wins on the schedule
Yes.
still.
Agreed.
Yeah. A lot of just show up and don't screw it up wins
right.
on the schedule still.
Q Kibbs, though the 2016 season was bad, there were a lot of positive dominoes to fall from it in the coming years. If Notre Dame goes, say, 10-2 that year, is Notre Dame football in a better or worse place today? Fun thought. I think they're in a worse place today because I don't think they make the changes that he needed to make. And I also think that Brian Kelly's still the head coach.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So as painful as the 2016 season was, when you look at it in hindsight, it benefited the program in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, absolutely.
You're 100% right, Vince. I mean, remember when I was on the Bill King show after that season, and I said this is either going to be the end of Brian Kelly's career, it's going to be the best thing that's ever happened to him.
Yeah.
And it ended up being the best thing that ever happened for him because he was forced begrudgingly to make changes. And he didn't even make all the changes.
Right.
I've said this before.
Right.
Jack Swarbrick and Chad Klunder drove the push to get Mike Elko and Chip Long, not Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly was looking for other jobs.
Yeah.
And then when he couldn't get it, he came back to Notre Dame.
Right.
And he reaped the rewards of what mainly Jack Swarbrick
and other
Mike
people's
Elko
work were doing. Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yep. It's funny how the truth comes out. Not that it wasn't out before, because it was. It just wasn't, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with a fun one that's a little bit more down the road here from Leonidas Spartan Kick. Brian and Vince, were you able to get out of your driveway this morning?
I didn't even try.
I was, because I'm obviously not at home. But that's because I took care of the driveway this morning at about 7 a.m. And so I was that guy with the snowblower.
I don't see how you have 5 kids and not one of them could go out there and shovel. You have a teenage son, and you still got to do the driveway. That's a mess.
You know why? I'll give you one reason: peace and quiet.
No,
I enjoy it. I enjoy it. So, and I have a little snowblower, so we're good. But anyway, I wanted to bring that one up just for fun. Back to the top, Q Kibbs. Brian, how does the organization of off-season workouts go? I love the peek behind the curtain stuff. Mm-hmm. Does Reese give Buckner a binder of things to work on, and it's up to them to coordinate? Always curious on that if you have insights.
I mean, it's different for every team, but normally there's some sort of guidance that you give. You can't mandate it, though. You can't say you have to do this, this, and this because that's
at this time and at this place
allowed, right?
And all that. Yeah.
The main thing is Buckner is like the other players in the weight room, and they're being pushed in those regards. But then it's like, hey, look, we want to have X number 7-on-7s. Make sure you're not overdoing how much you throw. Work on our stuff. You know what I mean? Like, make sure you're running our plays,
and the staff will get them, time in the indoor facility, that kind of stuff. I mean,
right. They're allowed to go work out in there because they're at right. So, I mean, but all that stuff has to be organized by the players, right? As Q Kibbs kind of alluded to, there's O-line, D-line workouts. They do conditioning things together. There's a lot of things that the players do together, which is why we've said in the past, why the winner is when your leadership starts to emerge.
Right.
It's because, like, who's leading those charges?
Right.
And trust me, the coaches know who's doing that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they know who's doing that, Vince. And you and I both know that, even at the high school level.
I see it every day when we're in the weight room.
You know. And so you also find out a lot about your team, like how many guys were at the 7. I mean, we have enough receivers to throw the ball. Okay, well, it's up to you to fix that because I can't fix it as your coach. I can't mandate guys be there.
I mean, and there's little things
but you learn about your players. Though, like,
100%.
Oh, okay, so-and-so hasn't been any of the 7-on-7s. No. Okay, good to know.
Who's sitting down between reps in the weight room?
Right. You can't say anything to them because then it looks like you're not playing because you didn't go to voluntary workouts. But trust me, impacts decisions.
My favorite is the voluntary workouts, right? They're voluntary, but they're not. I mean, we're all, and I actually tell my kids this, and it's the same thing. I'm always evaluating. Mm-hmm. I'm always evaluating. Yes, we have tryouts from this day to this day, whatever. It's the official tryouts, whatever. But guess what? Unless something crazy happens, I know exactly who I'm coming out of camp with, right? Mm-hmm. I'm always evaluating. And it's the same thing on any team. And it's the same thing for the Notre Dame coaches in the wintertime. They're always evaluating. They're talking to Coach Bayless and his staff. They're always evaluating, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a constant thing. And but that's what keeps kids on their toes too. You know what I mean? It prevents complacency. And that's what I like. So That's a really good question.
Good question.
I
Yeah.
lאבל that behind the scenes
But
stuff.
no, but the one thing is you can't give a binder of what to do. That is an official kind of here's what you're supposed to do. You can give a binder of, hey, here's the kind of workout you need to do. And you can tell kids if you're working out on your own, here's what you would need to do to work out on your own, but you can't mandate certain things.
Right.
And I don't believe you can give that. And maybe the rules have changed since I was coaching where you can now like, hey, here's some 7-on-7 plays to run. I don't know if that's allowed, but it wasn't when I was coaching.
Which would make sense.
Yeah.
God Country Notre Dame Barbecue. Can you talk about why Jimmy Clausen didn't have success in the NFL? I always thought he was a great talent at Notre Dame. Was it an attitude, work ethic, system he played in, or something else?
I think there's several things. Number one is he never recovered from the foot. I mean, I've been told that he had like torn ligaments in his foot. Like his foot was in bad shape in 2009. And he never recovered from that. And he wasn't a very athletic guy anyway. And I also think that Jimmy wasn't really a great leader. But I think and he didn't have a great arm. He was accurate and precise, and as a college quarterback was very good. But I think a lack of size, he wasn't the biggest guy, and the lack of mobility combined with not having a cannon for an arm had as much to do with his attitude. I mean, we've seen guys with crap attitudes hang around for a long time in the NFL. Jeff George, so I don't think that's why Jimmy didn't last. I think Jimmy didn't last because he couldn't move in the pocket and wasn't a real big guy.
If you're going to be a smaller guy, you have to be able to move around a little bit. Right?
Yeah. I mean, like you don't have to be Kyler Murray, but you have to be able to maneuver in the pocket. And
you got to be Drew Brees. You got, Drew Brees
Jimmy was never great in the pocket.
Right.
Ever. Right. I mean, he just could get rid of the ball so quickly. When the NFL, those windows aren't there to just get rid of it all the time. You have to manipulate the pocket. And I just don't think Jimmy could do that. But his attitude didn't help.
No, it didn't. No, that I will agree with. Nate W. Every time Dante Moore is mentioned in the show, Vince voices his desire to wear Michigan clothing. Is anyone else worried about Vince being
Actually, I had to talk Vince into that, Nate. I had to talk Vince into wearing it. He said no at first.
There is no worry about me being a closet Michigan fan, okay? I literally stayed in the hotel room when my brother-in-law graduated from the University of Michigan, and the graduation ceremony was in the big house. I volunteered to stay in the hotel room with my twin daughters who were like infants and my son who was like 3, okay, for like 5 hours in a hotel room with 3 little itty-bitty kids, okay, because I didn't want to go. I couldn't do it, okay? The only time I have ever talked myself into going to the big house is when Notre Dame is playing, okay? So I'm sorry. I have Michigan friends, Michigan fan friends. I'm never going to be a Michigan fan. It's just never going to happen. So, Nate, I appreciate the effort, but no, don't ever be worried about that. Oh, I want to save that one. I'm sorry.
Save that one for Ryan?
Yeah. I mean, it starts with the NFL draft.
Yep.
Of course, I'm going to save that one for Ryan.
I have the same reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Hold on now for Ryan when Ryan gets here.
Absolutely. Yeah. John A1, can Tyler Buckner be better for Notre Dame than Taj Boyd was for Clemson? Can Tyler match the production average of 3,800 yards passing, 500 yards rushing per season for 3 consecutive seasons? It's a good question.
Well, I don't know if the 3,800 yards, a lot of that's kind of subjective a little bit, to be honest with you, in my opinion, because it's a different type of offense. That was a spread offense and things like that. I mean, my gut is to say, yes, he can, right? Because I think he's a better talent than Taj Boyd was.
I do too.
But, Taj was also thrown to Sammy Watkins and DeAndre Hopkins and Martavis Bryant. And I mean, here's the receivers that he threw to during his career.
Got weapons, but yeah.
Right. Sammy Watkins, DeAndre Hopkins, Dwayne Allen, let's see here, Martavis Bryant, Adam Humphries. I mean, these are all NFL dudes, I mean, so, and it was a spread offense. There was a lot of stuff where he was throwing the ball and it was screens and things like that. So, I mean, my thought my initial reaction is I don't really care as much about the numbers per se.
Right.
I care more about the production and in regards to the offense as a whole. You know what I mean? And so sometimes Tyler Buckner's success is going to lead to teams overplaying him, which then opens up
Exactly.
opportunities for you to run for 250 yards as a team. Or maybe you look at Tyler Buckner's production and you're like, yeah, he didn't put up monster numbers in this game, but his impact was clearly felt because it opened up other opportunities. So I don't want to get tied in, John, to a specific stat line, but I do like the thought that you look at and say, thinking of Taj Boyd, smaller, run first guy that developed as a passer. I think Taj was an underrated thrower of the football during his career. But you look at his first year, they threw 409. He threw 499 passes in his first year at Clemson. That's a lot of passes. I mean, that's a lot of passes. And so, I don't know if I would say that, Tyler Buckner's ever going to throw anywhere close to 499 passes. I mean, you look at this year, there was only 6 quarterbacks in all of college football that threw more than 499 passes. Jack Cohn had 386. I mean, if you look at Notre Dame's whole team combined this year, and I don't think they had 499 passes. They had 451. And that included throwing 68 times in a bowl game.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
right.
Even on a team that couldn't really run the ball that effectively, Notre Dame still as a team, only threw 451 passes. 362 last year, 416 the year before that, 418 the year before
Feels
that.
like it should be a bigger number than that, but yeah. Wow. Okay.
I mean, 388 in 2016, 384 in 2015. Even the year Everett was the quarterback, that was the most they've ever thrown, was 463 times. And there were some games where they threw the ball a lot.
Yeah.
So they threw the ball a ton because, again, it was a traditional spread offense that threw a lot of bubble screens, threw a lot of tunnel screens. Just that's going to add to the production. Maybe he can get there. I mean, look, is he capable of getting there? Yeah, talent-wise, of course. My concerns, John, are more system-related, because I think Notre Dame, is a team that would like to be a better running team than Clemson was during that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of – in the 3 years that Taj was a starter, they ran for 158 yards and 4.2 per carry. The next year is 191 and 4.2 yards per carry. A lot of that was Taj. The next year, they had 175 yards per game, 4.2 yards per carry. So, it wasn't really till Deshaun took over in 2015 that the run game really took off. So I think that balances it out too. If you're, even if they have the same number of yards, if you're getting 20, 30, 40 more yards per game rushing, that's over the course of the year, it's almost 500 yards if you're at 40 yards a game, just the regular season. So, that takes away from that passing stat, right? And does other things. So, but I think the impact could be similar. But I think Tyler's a more dynamic player than Taj was.
Yes,
just talent-wise.
Yes, right.
I'm not saying he's a better player than a guy that I think John, I love Taj Boyd. I mean, I've talked about Taj Boyd a ton of times, how he actually got that Clemson ball rolling, and then Deshaun built on that. But I think Tyler Buckner has more natural ability than Taj Boyd had, especially as a passer.
Here's one about Tyler Buckner. Again, has there been any word on Buckner's progress? I don't think there will be any until we see what's going on during the spring, right?
No, there won't be.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've seen this question asked a bunch. That's why
he's working hard in the weight room.
Yeah. I mean,
right. There's not going to be anything. I mean, and honestly, I've heard some, so-and-so looks great in 7-on-7. I don't care.
It doesn't matter. Well, remember, 7-on-7 doesn't matter, Brian.
Right. Oh, don't even get me started on that.
I had to go
there. Don't
there.
even get me started on that.
I had to go there. All right. John with another question. Will Houston Griffith be battling Joseph or Henderson based on skill set? Which safety pairing is the most complementary?
Well, I think he'd probably, based on what we saw last year, probably be in the same position that Brandon Joseph was based on last year. But honestly, I don't think it matters. The skill set is find the two best safeties.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's really interchangeable in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't look at it like that. They're going to find the two best safeties, John.
Right.
And if Houston's the third safety, then it comes down to, okay, who do they want to take off the field the most? Is it Ramon or Joseph, or is it both? And then it's a 3-man rotation. Because if you're going to play 4 safeties and Houston's your third guy and there's a clear difference between 1 and 2, you're going to want to keep 1 on the field more.
Yeah.
And then that means, 2 and 3 are going to rotate more. So I don't think it'll be based on skill set. I think it's about who is going to be who goes out there and proves to be the most effective, most capable of making plays,
most versatile,
assignment at the high level.
All
but
of those things.
I don't know, but the versatility, personally, I don't think versatility matters as much, because I think that they're all kind of like him and DJ are kind of the same guy in some ways. And the safety positions are so naturally interchangeable.
Okay.
But I think that, where I think of what I would say, I think whoever proves to be the least limited. How about that, Vince?
Okay.
Meaning because to your point, I think that's where you're getting at is if one guy can only play the alleys.
Exactly.
Then he's limited. It's not that he's versatile, because I wouldn't call it versatile. I think that's what you got to do to be able to play in this defense.
Right.
And so that guy might be more limited. I think that might be a better way to describe it.
And from a versatility standpoint, I guess, or a limited standpoint, it's also, what do they do when they want to go nickel? Are they going to bring in a corner? Or are they going to bring in a third safety? You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like? And with least amount of movement on and off the field as possible, things like that. So I think that's going to be a really fun thing to watch in the spring, to see as they kind of go through that and start to get a feel for who's going to be where, what does that nickel look like, that kind of stuff. I think you do have a legitimate shot of having a third safety on the field as opposed to a third corner.
Right.
I think that's a legitimate possibility. So,
especially against certain offenses. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And that's the other thing about Notre Dame not being in a conference is you jump from conference to conference to conference. So you're jumping from different offense to different offense to different offense. And you're going to have different guys out there helping you out at different times, right? And you obviously throw triple option into the mix as well. So, yeah, I think all 3 of those guys are going to play, but it's going to be interesting to see who kind of rises to the top.
Yeah.
JoJo says, happy Friday, guys. Hi, Brian. Which tag team would you prefer? Moore and Tate or Harris and Downs?
Moore and Tate or Harris and Downs? I'm going to have to go with Harris, AJ Harris. I'm going to have to go with Moore and Tate. It's about the quarterback. I mean, Notre Dame's going to have good players at those positions. They have to have a quarterback. It has to be quarterback.
That's where I would go as well. We have talked so many times about quarterback and how they need a dynamic quarterback and blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? It's all the stuff we've talked about. I can't sit here with a good conscience and not pick the dynamic quarterback. Right. And then you bring in a dynamic wide receiver along with them. I'm sorry, that's the direction I have to go as well. So I'm with you on that one. Cliff says, what's the realistic jump in production for the O-line, and how do you quantify it besides the eye test?
Well, I think they can make a big jump for a minute. I think, look, if Jeff Quinn was still here, I think the offensive line would be better next year than it was this year.
Just from an experience standpoint?
Blake's going to be going into year 2. Joe Alt's going into year 2. Let's just assume for a second that Jarrett Patterson still came back. Just right. I still think you would have seen a better line. Now, the question is how much better will this line be than that improved line would have been?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So
you're measuring against something that you don't know the answer to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I feel that it's going to be significant. And the way to quantify it, I think there are things you look for: efficiency numbers. And to me, efficiency is best measured by yards per play. Is the most easy way to look at it, just stats that you can look at. And then you go beyond to the true efficiency numbers, like, how many of your carriers are going for at least 4 yards or picking up a first down, that kind of thing, and the efficiency numbers are important because, like, the 2017 offensive line, for example, produced a great run game numbers wise, but it wasn't a super efficient offense because of the backs weren't as good. And so, because Josh Adams was prone to too many 2-yard losses because he was so undecisive at times, and different things like that. Not maybe 2017 be a bad example, but like 2018, there were years where the yards per carry by the starter was good, but it was good because they had like a 97-yard run. CJ Prosise is probably the best example of that. He was a home run hitter that had a great yards per carry, but he wasn't really super efficient, And that's kind of the thing that we've kind of focused on. So I think those are ways you do it. Sacks, what I would say is like non-third down sacks is a way to evaluate it, because sometimes third down sacks can be a little misleading. It's 3rd and 9. The quarterback stays in the pocket and he's kind of looking downfield. I think if Tyler Buckner's a starter, the sack numbers can be misleading. And you're going to have to look at pocket sacks, compared to just overall sacks, because there's going to be time that Tyler's going to have time, but he's going to scramble and run around and run himself into a sack. That just happens with mobile quarterbacks. And so those are some things you have to kind of think about, but it's really going to come down to yards per play, more so than yards per game, in my opinion. But in this specific year, there needs to be a big jump in yards per game as well, because they didn't run the football at all last year.
John, with his final question of the day, he says, if Chance Tucker has the speed the staff thinks he has, what is his ceiling? Would it be higher than Barnes or Riley?
I think it would be higher than Riley. So I think what Barnes does is Barnes makes up for the difference in speed and length and instincts.
Long. He's so long.
So to your point, though, if Chance Tucker has the speed the staff thinks he does, would his ceiling be higher than those two? I think it'd be higher than Philip Riley's for sure. Because here's the thing about Chance. The one thing I never questioned about Chance was he is a smooth athlete, but he has a very high football IQ. One thing I noticed about him in high school is Chance gets his hands on a lot of passes in high school, right? Now, I wish we could have seen more of him as a senior.
Yeah, right.
I think he played in the spring, but it was like just a few games because of COVID. But
can never keep those straight, who got what and what. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he was a super instinctive guy. The only question I had was, can he run? And it was because he played so much press, and I just wasn't sure about that. But if they're right about his speed and he can stay healthy, because he was banged up a lot this year, I would say he has a higher ceiling than Philip. I think Philip Riley of all the corners last year has the highest floor by far. It's does he have the ceiling? That's the question. And I think Chance has a higher ceiling potentially if he is as fast, because like based on my recruiting grades, his ceiling isn't high as Philip Riley's. But that's working with the premise that I'm not sure how fast he is.
Right.
John's comment is, if he's as fast as the staff says he is, then that changes my perception of him based on what my grade was as a high school player. Because you always have to go with new data, new realities. I mean, I can't continue to evaluate Will Fuller based on what he was in high school because he got faster at Notre Dame. That changes your evaluation of him, right? And so to me, that would be my thing is, yes, I think if Chance is as fast as people tell me he is, he could be a starting cornerback in Notre Dame. And I don't say that just like, well, anyone can start. But, like, he could be a good play, like a guy that can go start for you and run with some people, because the instincts is there, the toughness is there, the ball skills are there. My only question has always ever been speed. So that's really all I ever really kind of got caught up in.
Corey Flynn, hearing Freeman has been consulting Lou Holtz during his presser was music to my ears.
Yeah. We had a couple people mention that, but
I completely agree with that, Brian. I'm sorry, but it seems to me head coach at Notre Dame 101 is you reach out to the guys that you have the ability to reach out to, right? Mm-hmm. And Lou Holtz would be the number one on my list, right? He took over a program that wasn't very good. He's a motivational guy. He's obviously got some good ideas. Now, as the game passed him by, sure, you're not asking him X's and O questions. That's not what you're asking him. You're asking him what it's like to be the head coach at Notre Dame. You're asking him, what was his experience like? And then you use that information and you adapt it to what you're doing. But how do you not get Lou Holtz involved? I mean,
because you think you're the smartest guy in the room and you think you're smarter than everybody else. I mean, that's what, what it comes down to for me, Vince. It's what we've been saying since Marcus Freeman was a coordinator at Notre Dame. He has genuinely embraced Notre Dame.
Yes.
In a way that we really haven't seen since Charlie. And now, say what you want about Charlie Weiss, but Charlie embraced Notre Dame because he was a grad.
Because he was a student here.
He loved it here, right? Exactly. Bob Davie never embraced Notre Dame. Ty Willingham never embraced Notre Dame. Lou did, Charlie did, and Marcus Freeman is.
Agreed.
Has. Now we need to find out if he's more like Lou Holtz as a coach or like Lou Holtz. And there was another question that somebody had, Vince, in there. If you can find it while we're talking, But somebody asked about the video that was up
Oh,
last
yeah.
night that they have
I
since
did
taken
see
down.
that.
I don't know if you watched the video.
I didn't even know it
Vince.
existed.
So I didn't know. Somebody put it on our message board last night. Here it is from Hey Bob.
Oh, okay.
Did you get to watch the state of the program before it was made private? Any thoughts? If so, and yeah, I did. So what it was is Marcus Freeman got on a Zoom call with a bunch of former Notre Dame players, alums. I mean, I saw Zorich on there. I think I saw Lee Becton on there. Sean Wooden was on there. Rick Meyer got in at some point in time.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of guys on there. And at first it was just, Hunter Bivin asking him, okay, what's the latest on this? He talked about NIL. He talked about how Notre Dame's not there yet. There's things they're doing. He kind of talked about how, I think part of it is marketing it correctly. Talked about transfer portal, talked about the new coaching staff. It was a pretty cool thing. I mean, he had a lot of cool things to say. Then he opened it up to questions to the alums. And the premise of it was, we need you. He made this comment. He said it like he was surprised, like how little he saw former players in his year at Notre Dame, and how it bothered him that he saw so few alums. Like we got to get you guys back here. So they're going to do something. They're talking about doing something for like the Blue Gold game where they get all this access. And he's like, I want you guys around my players. He goes, I don't want the tradition stuff to just be about talk. It's got to be about, they got to meet you. They got to know you.
You got to see it.
I'm hearing like angelic, music playing, and it's like, because he gets it. He understands. You can't sell tradition at Notre Dame and then not embrace the people who built the freaking tradition in the first place.
Right.
But that was Brian Kelly.
But again, that's football 101 as the head coach.
That was his narcissism coming through. And I've said this for years. Brian Kelly wanted one face of Notre Dame football, and it was him. He would occasionally use Lou Holtz as a pawn, or, I remember, Ara Parseghian spoke once to the team early in his tenure, but it was always about Brian Kelly using them for something he wanted to accomplish, as opposed to, I know Brian Kelly talked to Lou Holtz as well, but it was more of like you're doing it because you have to kind of thing, from what I was told. Whereas I think Marcus Freeman is going to Lou Holtz not for, hey, what scheme did you run? Because the game has changed. It's more of like, hey, inspiration and all this kind of stuff, I'm loving it. Because again, you can't win at Notre Dame if you don't embrace what makes Notre Dame different.
Exactly.
You can't complain and bitch about, well, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, we can't do that. You knew that when you took the freaking job, right? So don't complain about, oh, gee, academic standards are tough, when you knew that when you took the job. And that's the thing that Marcus Freeman is like, he wants to change things, but he knows that he's got to stay within a certain, he's not saying, can I get a bunch of 2.2 GPAs, like 12 a year? That's not going to happen, right? But there are things you can do. Right. Work on those things. And so to me, that's the big thing for me is he has embraced what makes Notre Dame unique. And there's two ways you can say, here's what makes Notre Dame different, or here's what makes Notre Dame special. Brian Kelly focused on what made Notre Dame different. We have to shop down a different aisle. We have to recruit different types of players. We have to, we actually have kids that, and then there's looking at it as like, this is what makes Notre Dame special. And Lou Holtz looked at those differences as being special. Brian Kelly looked at those differences as being roadblocks.
And that's why he left.
And that's the difference.
Because he wanted to get rid of those roadblocks. He never
ultimately got Notre Dame to that pinnacle.
Yes.
In my opinion, despite having some very talented football teams.
Agreed.
So, yeah, great question.
That's a fantastic question, because I feel the same way. And it just blew my mind how it was never embraced by the previous head coach.
And it was so obvious, too.
Yeah.
It wasn't even.
And if you listen to Lou Holtz talk, you could tell that when he had talked to Brian Kelly, that it was surface talk. You know what I mean? Like, Brian Kelly or Lou Holtz doesn't beat around the bush. Like, I mean, look, he's not going to bash Brian Kelly or anything like that, but you could just tell when he would talk about it, it was just different in a bad way. You know what I mean? And it just is what it is. And and Marcus Freeman's embracing it. And you could tell he was embracing it during the interview that you had with him last summer.
Before the season started.
Right. Last summer, when you had that interview with him on the podcast, and he was talking about, why would you not want to come to Notre Dame, and all of these different, like, he was in like hook, line, and sinker, and he understood what Notre Dame was all about. And it's just been enhanced over the last year of him being here at Notre Dame. And it's fantastic. It just is what it is.
Yep,
so
I agree.
Okay, Chris Basker. I submitted a super chat Monday that I never heard in the show. It just said, "Let's go from gap closers to gap creators."
I love that.
That's
love that because what he's implying is it's done. We closed the gap. Now let's separate ourselves
from everybody in the back.
Right.
Absolutely.
Love it.
Shirt idea. There it is.
Love it.
It's happening. It's happening. Will Burkhart, excuse me. Is there a visit list for the blue gold game yet? I heard Mpemba is visiting now.
That's not going to be for the blue gold game, I don't believe. I think Samuel is coming up the weekend of March 18th, which will be a month before the blue gold game. That's the beginning of the start of spring practice. So I got an email this morning from someone who who sent me sort of the game plan for the spring, and it looks like spring practice is going to start March 17th. So that weekend, they're going to have a big recruiting weekend is what they're shooting towards. And I think Samuel Mpemba had mentioned, I think, to Brian Smith yesterday, because we had an update on – Brian put an update on Mpemba yesterday because IMG had a sort of like a pro day. Yeah, it's like a pro day. Like guys were working out, and then they had media afterwards, and so he got a chance to talk to Samuel, and he said Samuel was bringing up Notre Dame without being asked about Notre Dame, which you always like to hear.
And it's like, not a bad thing.
Somebody asked, "Who's your favorite coach to talk to?" And his first response was Marcus Freeman. And that wasn't. I don't think I could be wrong. I don't think that was Brian asking that question. I think that was Brian with a group of other reporters, and somebody else asked him that. I could be wrong on that, but I thought that's how Brian relayed it, because he texted me. He's like, Notre Dame leads for Mpemba. I was like, really? Still? And he's like, yeah. I was like, because I knew he was at the pro day, but yeah, he said that. I mean, he said you could see him light up when he started talking about Marcus Freeman. So that's all
right, gentlemen. Yeah. I'm gonna get out of here. But
you're gonna be able to MC for a little bit,
for a very little bit. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Then what I would say to do, Vince, is I'm gonna just start working through the questions.
Okay.
If you can just work through and continue to try star some.
Angling for recruiting questions, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Well, no, I mean, just any good questions, because we're going to talk team stuff at first, and then we'll get into the recruiting.
I'm on it.
So, all right, thanks.
Everybody have a great weekend.
We're going to bring up that NFL draft one we've been holding. We had an NFL draft question real early.
We're like, no,
we can't bring this up until we bring Ryan on the show. So let's go ahead and get Ryan involved. So for Ryan's time, because that's like, you're not allowed in the first hour, Ryan. You're banned from the show. It's only me and Vince. We got to hang out as old timers. For Ryan's time, what NFL team's offensive system would you want to see Dante more in? Assume all other players are what they are today.
It's a great question. I don't think there's a limit to him. I mean, if you're asking me what I think he would run best in, I would definitely want to see a lot of heavy RPO looks out of it, right? Like I want to see some quick decisions. I want to see him get some quick numbers, types of situations. Quick release. So again, RPO action out of it. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, basically every team has some type of RPO concepts to their game now. I think heavily of like some of the West Coast systems. Maybe the Mike Shanahan tree.
I like him in McVay's offense. I mean, you're talking about
that's that trend.
Yeah,
that's that tree. That's the Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan running over to the Jets. Now Miami down there with Mike McDaniel is going to be running some of the same.
Ryan, you saw that tree. Can you just, because some people don't know this. Yeah. Can you talk about all the coaches that were on that Mike Shanahan staff with the Redskins back in the day? Because it was obviously Kyle and McVay, but there was like
Jay Gruden. There was Mike McDaniel was on that staff because he's been with Kyle Shanahan for like 15 years.
Was LaFleur? I think it wasn't LaFleur.
Matt LaFleur was a young coach on there. McVay. There was somebody else too that was like, oh wow, I didn't even know he was on there. I want to say maybe not during the Mike Shanahan era in Washington, but when Jay Gruden was on there, I know the last couple years, I believe at least. Who was there? Oh man, there was a couple guys because I remember them talking about it. Kevin O'Connell, who's now the new Minnesota Vikings head coach, he was, I think, an offensive analyst or something like that with Washington, and then he went with Sean McVay eventually to he took over as the Washington offensive coordinator after McVay left, and then he came back over with McVay to be his offensive coordinator. So, I mean, it was a crazy tree, man. And the crazy part about it was, I think the last year that Mike was there, obviously, like his tenure in Washington wasn't great, right? So, like their staff that year, I'm pretty sure they went like 7-9 or 6-10, but then you see like all just the head coaches, future head coaches that are on that tree, and it's ridiculous, man. And obviously, when you think about Mike Shanahan and what he was able to do with Denver, you think, they're obviously running a lot of wide zone stretch system, a lot of play action off of it, vertical stretch stuff. But they really took what was kind of conceived as like the West Coast, right? Which you think of like short, intermediate crossing routes, a lot of action off of it. They really kind of, and Mike Shanahan obviously increased it with John Elway, and then Brett Favre, obviously with Mike Holmgren as well. They did a lot more vertical stretch off of it, so they're stretching the field a lot more than horizontally at that point.
And he actually started that right before he came back to Denver, because if you remember that San Francisco offense where he was the OC that won the Super Bowl in '94, this might be a little bit before your time, but they threw the ball downfield a lot on that team, right? And I don't know if Steve Young won the MVP that year, but that was the year that he won Super Bowl with Shanahan as the OC. And then, of course, they brought him back to Denver. And as you said, they took full advantage of John Elway being and I've always said this, like you can't just say West Coast and assume it's going to look like this. Like everybody has their own. Mike Shanahan's West Coast looked a whole lot different than John Gruden's West Coast, right? I mean,
right.
But
go
ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. Oh, no, I was going to say even the principle of like, obviously at the core, the Kyle Shanahan system is a West Coast offense, right? But like the last couple of years with Jimmy Garoppolo, it's been very more traditional, what you would think, those short crossing routes. Now that Trey Lance is going to be at the helm, I would assume that we would now evolve into more of that vertical stretch, kind of what we're thinking as well.
Right. And he's certainly put, well, I'll say this, he's definitely putting the weapons together to be more a vertically oriented football team. Absolutely. You don't draft Brandon Ayuk and you don't have George Kittle as a tight end if you don't want to stretch the field, but you also have to have the trigger man that can get it done.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, from what I've seen of the Niners, they didn't necessarily have that. So I think the big thing for me is I think Dante Moore's athletic, but he is a guy that to me at his core is a pocket passer.
Sure.
That, and so like I think of like, as a Broncos fan, what little I know of the Packers, I think like if Nathaniel Hackett brings the offense there that kind of we saw in Green Bay, that's an offense that Dante Moore would fit in. It's about accuracy, decision-making, and yes, you got to be able to get the ball downfield. But I mean, that's another one that I would see. But
and he was under Matt LaFleur as well. So like that's again directly just breaking off that tree a little bit, man.
Yeah, line. Absolutely. And again, I mean, let's bring it full circle back to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Who are the people that I believe Tommy Rees studies the most? I think it's McVay, it's LaFleur, it's McVay, it's Shanahan, it's those guys. And that is another reason why I think Dante would be such a great fit and for what Notre Dame does.
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
That right there.
Yeah.
A draft. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, you go ahead.
Say we had a draft question for you.
Okay.
It'll stay in the NFL and about quarterbacks. NFL draft-wise, and again, this is super early, right? And I hate doing this personally, but it was asked, and so I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
NFL draft-wise, what is the ceiling of Tyler Buckner, Drew Pine, and Dante Moore? Is more a first overall potential?
Oh, man.
Let me just say one thing. He's a junior in high school.
Yes.
Right? And so it is like a huge leap to say any junior in high school is going to be the first number one overall pick.
Right.
My answer would simply be, I believe he has some traits that in time could potentially lead him to be that kind of quarterback. Yes, I would say that. Yes.
Well,
but
we always make the parallels to Deshaun Watson, right? Like, and I think there are some parallels there. Deshaun Watson was a first round pick. He was not the first overall selection. And so if the question was maybe phrased a little differently, like, do I think that he has first round potential or first round traits? Then I would be more willing to be like, yeah. I mean, like first round traits, if everything is developed properly. I mean, obviously that's a big projection. I mean, we're projecting. I mean, usually usually when I'm in the summer, I'm projecting a few months out. Now you're asking me to project 4 years out, maybe 5 years out.
Yeah.
So I would say that the traits are definitely there. I mean, Buckner, we have to just see what the passing looks like. I mean, he's a good athlete, so there's definitely a projection for him. Drew Pine is, there's going to be a safeness to Drew Pine, but at the end of the day, Drew Pine needs to find a situation where he's going to play football, right? Like at the end of the day, before we can even start thinking about like what his next level potential is, whether that is at Notre Dame or it's at a different school. There needs to be some type of resume, right? Like there needs to be some game film. You can't evaluate nothing right now. And that's kind of just what we have right now from him.
Right. I think the other thing too is when I talk about Dante Moore's comparison being similar to Deshaun Watson, it's not comparing their games, it's comparing their impact on the program. It's that guy that can put a team on his shoulders and say, hey, we were good before. Because let's not forget, Taj Boyd led them to an Orange Bowl victory over Ohio State. He led them to a Peach Bowl victory over LSU, right? Like he did some, and then they had a loss in an Orange Bowl. So they were good under Taj.
That West Virginia game, right? That was ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. That was in 11. No, that was in 11. They got blasted. And that's when he fired Kevin Steele and brought in Brent Venables, which kind of, and I think soon after, I'm trying to remember when, I think that's also around when, did he bring in Chad Morse also at that time, or was Chad already there that year? I can't remember. That specific part of the timeline. It was 2011, so that was Chad Morse's first year. So then they got that part of it going too. But that's when he got rid of Kevin Steele and brought in Brent Venables. But he got him to a level, and Deshaun said, "Okay, I'm the kind of guy that can get you to that next level." And I think that's where the comparison, like as far as the kind of players they are, Deshaun and Dante are not similar. I mean, Deshaun Watson ran for 1,000 yards as a sophomore. You're not going to see Dante Moore do that. That's just not his game. He is more of a pocket passer that happens to also be athletic. But if Dante Moore runs an offense where they run him 0 times, he's fine. I don't know if that would have been Deshaun in college. I don't know if Deshaun would have been as effective if you completely took his running ability out of his repertoire. Maybe now in the NFL, he's better to do that. But in college, he wasn't a good enough, an advanced enough passer at that time, in my opinion, to be a throwing-only quarterback, whereas Dante can be. It's just he happens to also be athletic. So the skill set is different. And I think, but to the point of the question, I think that's what makes Dante such a coveted potential NFL player, is because he is athletic, but he's a pocket passer. And at the end of the day, these teams want an athletic pocket passer more so than a runner. If you have a Josh Allen, use him, but there's not everyone's not looking for the next Josh Allen. They're still looking for the next Aaron Rodgers, the next Pat Mahomes, the next guy that can dominate from the pocket. That's all. At the end of the day, that's ultimately what the coaches want. You know what I mean? Let's be honest about that.
Well, I always have little back and forth sometimes in NFL draft circles, because people fall in love with the off script stuff, right? Which I get it, it's exciting, man, but the on script stuff is obviously more important. If it's all off script and you don't have that baseline, then the guy can't play. I mean, it's just, we're seeing it in Philadelphia right now. It's like Jalen Hurts has some exciting moments and he can do some nice stuff with his legs, but the stuff in script, the stuff on schedule just isn't good enough right now. So they're always going to be, every single year, he's going to put up okay stats. He's going to win some games, but then people are going to say, but can we do better? Because the baseline just is not great enough right now. It's not good enough. So I think people just need to kind of understand that there is a baseline as an NFL passer, or just a passer in general, not even just NFL, that you have to be suitable enough at this level to that the off the script stuff actually does matter that much more.
I think that's one of the things that I always felt made Michael Vick an overrated player during his NFL career.
For sure.
Is he had some highlight reel plays, but his best season as a starter was 11-4. It's pretty good that year. But then after that, it's 8-7, 7-6, 7-9, 8-6-1. Had an 8-3 year in Philly where I think he came off the bench that year. But if you look at that version of Michael Vick, that was a different version of Michael Vick. Completely he was a little bit better. I mean, you were an Eagles fan. You remember he was more willing to sit in the pocket and make reads and make throws. And, that was after he'd missed the 2 years and the suspension and all that. But if you're talking about winning football games in the National Football League as a quarterback, you're not going to run around and do that stuff all day. I mean, let's not forget, there were years when John Elway was doing that, and the Broncos had some years when they weren't that good, right? I mean, you're going to be less consistent as a program or as a football team. And so you need to have a quarterback, especially in today's era, that can sit back and do damage from the pocket. That's the difference, and that's why Josh Allen isn't in the conversation for one of the 2 or 3, 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, at least in the conversation, because of the running ability.
Right.
It's because he has developed as a passer more than he was. Then that heightens his ability to be effective as a runner. And I think that's why at the end of the day, you still need a guy that can sit back in the pocket and do damage. And then if the off script is part of that, and that's what to me makes Patrick Mahomes so magical, because Patrick Mahomes can sit in the pocket and just pick you apart. But he's also going to make some plays off script where you're like, oh, okay, that was freaking disgusting.
The off the script stuff is a luxury. It's not the whole process, Right. But and we're even seeing it now. It's like every year it feels like Kyler Murray gets hurt, and then the running element stops near the end of the season, and then the Cardinals and him struggle. We saw Lamar Jackson get banged up this year, and the quarterback run game was not as good when he was able to play, and he struggled passing. So that baseline matters, and if you have the ability to do things out of script, off of it, that's when guys turn to really good into special. Like you're kind of talking about Patrick Mahomes, when you're talking about when Lamar Jackson at his best, when Kyler Murray's got everything working, like that, then those guys could potentially be special. Aaron Rodgers could sit in the pocket, like you said, and just kill you all day from inside the pocket. But then he can also break the pocket and do some absurd things on the run throwing the football. But that's not the baseline of what he does. That's a luxury to what he does.
Right. So really interesting stuff, combining your passion with your new and budding passion, recruiting and the draft. Tyler Buckner, to me, ceiling wise, I mean, it's just, I got to see him evolve more as a thrower first. Drew Pine to me is Ian Book. I mean, that's they're different type. I mean, Ian's a more mobile guy. Drew, I think, is a better passer. When we talk about ceiling, impact on the team, draft, that's about as high as it could go. And I think Ian Book was drafted too high, in my opinion. I don't think he's a fourth round.
I think the Saints think that too right now.
It didn't take him long to figure that out either. I mean, they were talking about trying to trade him before they even got to the start of the regular season.
Man, he was the fourth string quarterback to start the year, and you drafted him in the fourth round.
And Trevor, and he's playing behind Trevor Siemian. Like, just
yes,
that's one of those mic drop comments you can make. Like, they chose Trevor Siemian over him.
Sure did.
Sparkley's one. Hey guys, when could we expect Dante Moore to commit? Spring, summer? I would say late spring, early summer would be probably the sweet spot, if based on where things are right now. That could change. He may just decide, you know what, man, I know where I want to go. That's the thing about Dante. I think if Dante wakes up and he's just like, yeah, I know where I want to go, and then wakes up the next day feeling the same thing, and then you know what I mean? Like, it's not like he's a smart kid. He's not going to just wake up in a mood one day and commit to a school. But it's more about when he starts waking up on consistent days saying, this is where I want to be, I think he'll make his decision, even if it's earlier than he expects, because as we've said before, he understands the impact he will have on whatever class he jumps in. He gets that. But I think right now, I think he likes Notre Dame a lot. I think if I had to say it, I would say Notre Dame, in my opinion, is probably his leader. But I also think he likes other programs, and he's not going to make a decision until he's ready. So but I also don't think he's a kid who's going to unnecessarily drag this out for any arbitrary reasons. When he knows, I think he'll decide. So it may be late spring, early summer. He may wake up in 2 weeks and be like, you know what, man, this is it. I know where I want to be, and make that decision. But it will be a thoughtful decision, which is why I highly doubt Dante Moore's a flip kid, because I think he's going to make a very thoughtful, rational decision. And when he buys in, he's going to fully buy in, is my opinion. Here's one from Tyler Longbreak. Let's say Notre Dame lands Samuel Mpemba, Christian Gray, Malik Muhammad, good Lord, Jason Moore. Would this be the best defensive recruiting class ever? If so, how would this rank of top defensive classes of all time that you can think of?
I mean, off the top of my head, maybe, right? Like, I can't think of one that would – I mean, because then we're talking about Mpemba's a 5-star. Jason Moore's a top 50 player. Malik Muhammad's a top 50 player. Christian Gray by, what was it, 247, or was it, he was like 108 or
150.
something?
I think Rivals had him at 108. He's like a 150 kind of guy.
So he's a 150 kid on top of Keon Keeley, who's a 5-star, top 50 Brennan Vernon, Peyton Bowen, top 50, maybe better if he increases in the season.
Rivals has Brennan Vernon at number 17. I mean,
maybe.
Don Shule would be like your 10th ranked defensive player in the class at that point in time.
Right. I mean, so yes, off the top of my head, I would say yes. Obviously, your recruiting knowledge goes further back than mine, but just like in the recent years, I would say so. Yeah.
I mean, I think we have to separate generations. I'm not a fan of the whole best player ever thing, because we don't know how LeBron James would have been in the 80s and 90s, and we don't know how players from then will be now. We can guess and have fun debates, but ultimately we don't know. And so, recruiting rankings were different, services were different. Right now, when I look at the Notre Dame class from like 1990 and you look at the great players, I don't know how that, Lou Samoji talked about how that class was considered great at the time. I don't have any knowledge of that. I only know what they did at Notre Dame. So for me, it's unfair. So I kind of look at it like the Rivals era, which is kind of when the recruiting services began, which was like 2002. To me, if they get that, it's hands down the best class. And here's why I say that. There have been some years where they landed some big-time players that are every bit as good as the guys that would be at the top of this board. I think of the 2013 when they landed Jalen Smith and Eddie Vanderdoes, right, who were big-time players. I think of 2011 when, think about this. If Notre Dame gets Brendan Vernon, Jason Moore, and Keon Keeley, we have to have a debate about whether or not that's better coming out of high school than the 2011 group than an Aaron Lynch, Stephon Tuitt, and Ishaq Williams.
Yes.
Right? But here's the difference. Those classes had major holes at other positions, right? So like the defensive end class in 11 was great, but who were the defensive tackles? Was Tony Springman in that class? I think, right? I think Tony Springman was in that class. I think he was an inside guy. It wasn't actually. I just kind of pulled these up the other day. I just created a sheet, Ryan, for an NFL draft idea, recruiting rankings draft idea I had. So I have a sheet that has all the players by class. So if you look at the 2011 class, they had signed a bunch of defensive ends, but their defensive tackles were Brad Carrico and Tony Springman. The only safety they landed was Eiler Hardy, and the two corners they landed were the late Josh Atkinson and Jalen Brown. The thing is, we could debate whether the defensive end class from 11 was better coming out of high school than this class, but it's not a debate anywhere else. And that's the thing is linebacker to me would be better because Drake Bowen is a better prospect than Ben Council was. And I think Preston Zinter and Jarrett Grace are very similar. I was higher on Jarrett Grace in the recruiting services. I still say if he doesn't tear his knee up, Notre Dame's starting linebacking core in 2015 is Jarrett Grace and Jalen Smith, and that's a much better linebacking group. A healthy Jarrett Grace. So, but he was a top 250 guy. So, slight edge to the 2023 group, but then secondary, it's not even a conversation. Right. Eiler Hardy was a top 250 caliber guy. Josh Atkinson was a 3-star. Jalen Brown was a 3-star. You're talking about Eiler Hardy's the only guy even in conversation of getting a scholarship in this class. And to me, that's it's interior guys. If they got Devin Houston as part of this too, if you were to count Jason Moore as an interior guy with Devin Houston and compare that to Tony Springman and Brad Carrico, it's not even close. Right. I would say in 2013 the same way, you had Eddie Vanderdoes up front. You had Doug Randolph as an outside linebacker in a 3-4. You had Jalen Smith, Max Redfield, Cole Luke, but it was like Cole Luke and Rashad Kinlaw at corner. Right. Yeah. There was a drop off. You had Max Redfield, but I don't think they had another safety in that class. They were still coming up short on numbers, and that's the thing for me is I feel like this group would be much deeper. And that ultimately, Ryan, has got to be the goal. We've said this, Notre Dame take their top 5 or 6 players, and most years I'll stack them up against anybody's best 4, 5, 6 players. The gap has been like 7 through 15 as there's been an enormous gap in favor of the other teams. That's what would make this one special is it's not just landing 2 or 3 great players. It's landing like 9. You know what I mean? Like that's a gap closing. That's a gap erasing class right there, Ryan. That's not even a gap closing class. That's a gap erase class because that's a class that makes Alabama say, dang. You know what I mean? Like that's a class that Georgia looks and says, uh-oh, Notre Dame's doing some things. That's funny, man. That's a class that makes Brian Kelly say, did they change the academic standards at Notre Dame or something? Because I never had classes like that.
Why could I do that? Why could I
exactly. do that? Exactly. Work ethic. Excuse me. I had a little something in my throat here. But yeah, if Lou Samoji was here, he would immediately cut us off and start talking about the Ross Browner, Willie Fry, Luther Bradley class. And that's where it's like, I can't speak to that. Right. I can't really speak with knowledge of the 90-91 classes because I was 12. You know what I mean? Like I only knew them and there just wasn't the knowledge. It was the Parade All-Americans and that was like it. You know what I mean? Like it was like there wasn't the knowledge of all. I mean, we couldn't evaluate the star rankings of their 25th signee kind of thing. It just was a different era.
Isn't it crazy how far recruiting and the NFL draft, but just like football coverage in general just has, oh my, I can't even, like, sometimes I just sit back and like think, especially on the recruiting side of things. Cause I remember like I was a recruiting nerd when I was like growing up. Right. But like, I never remembered it being like this, you know, where it's just like video and multiple platforms and multiple rankings. And man, it is just blown up so much. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I mean, like, I mean, I know people I know people, I'm one of them. Yeah. I watch more draft stuff than I do NFL games. You know, I don't watch a lot of NFL games, but man, I'm a draft. You know this, Ryan. You've known this since you've known me. This is how we kind of met. Is I'm a draft junkie. I love the draft. Like I've always said, if I was ever going to do anything other than this, it would be getting into like front office where I could like just do draft stuff year round. You know, I mean that
evaluate.
Evaluate, be part of decision making. Like that would be like the only other job I could ever. I'm not considering it. I'm just making the point. You know.
But, this is Brian's making a career switch right now.
Nope.
You heard it?
Nope. I haven't brought. It's like that scene from Men in Black. I'm not bringing you for a partner. I'm bringing you here as my replacement. That is not happening. So I'm not going anywhere. But I just love that. I'm a draft nerd. I love that stuff. And like you said, there's just so much out there. You and I kind of got a good laugh at a couple mock drafts we saw yesterday. You know, it's just, and that's the thing. That's the bad thing about the good thing about social media is there's just a ton available. The bad thing about social media is there's just a ton available because it doesn't mean all of it's good, right? Yeah, and I think that's the thing for me. Rob Didoff has a comment. He says Brian and Vince is no longer with us on the show. He's still alive, but just not with us on the show. As we mentioned yesterday, NBC's coverage of Notre Dame is subpar at best. Agree. What if they did? So we talked a lot about Ryan yesterday, just for back. I don't know if you watched the show yesterday. I know you guys were a little sick at the house, so I wasn't sure if you watched it.
I was on with you yesterday, sir.
Were you?
Yes.
Oh, it was all three of us. That's right. Yes. Okay. I knew Vince was there.
I was like, I had this conversation.
Yeah.
I know this conversation.
Okay, so you know the backstory.
Yes.
What if they did a similar style replay on NBC or Peacock Sunday morning, similar to the days of Lindsey Nelson? They kind of do that already, though, Rob. But they put it on YouTube. I mean, you know what I mean? Like they kind of have those summaries, but I think that'd be fun. I mean, I think that'd be fun to watch, but they kind of already do that. And they wouldn't do it on TV. They just put it up on YouTube, I think would be how because that's how a lot of people became Notre Dame fans back in the day, was watching the Sunday Lindsey Nelson replays. So
I don't know what Lindsey Nelson is. So,
okay. Ryan is no longer with us today.
I was going to Google it, but
Yes, you'll need to Google it. Basically, okay. Lindsey Nelson was just a play-by-play guy that Notre Dame wouldn't have, this is before like games were televised live, but Notre Dame on Sunday mornings, they'd have a replay of the previous day's game, which often wasn't live, I don't think. But it was like they would shorten it, like, now we move on to further action, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Well, that's how a lot of people became Notre Dame fans, because that's all there was. So like my dad grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, and there wasn't like ACC football wasn't a thing. It was just AC basketball. And, Redskins were a big thing back then. It was pro football area, but there wasn't a lot of college football. And so the only college football my dad ever watched growing up was the Sunday replays before NFL games of Lindsey Nelson doing Notre Dame games. And that's how he became a Notre Dame fan. And I've heard a lot of stories from people that have similar stories of, this is how they became Notre Dame fans. So yeah, that's it's interesting. You have to do a little.
I'll have to look it up. Yeah, definitely will.
Jeffrey Joseph with a question. Jeffrey had an earlier super sticker, so we appreciate that. With respect to the wide receiver coach hire, you insinuated Reese didn't want other strong voices contributing to game planning. Does that worry you, considering his lack of experience? So I didn't say that I said that. I said I had some people that had said that was a potential concern. And the thing that I would say about it is it concerned me? It depends on why. Because here's the thing. If it was simply a guy had good ideas and Reese doesn't want you to say anything, he just wants you to go shut up and go coach receivers, that's a problem. If it's a situation where a guy's trying to come in and you need someone to coach the receivers, but he wants to be sort of the co-OC and kind of step on your toes and kind of say, hey, I'm going to bring my ideas in, that can be problematic. Because that's not the kind of, look, there's a hierarchy, right? Like this is your role, this is your role, this is your role. So I think it depends on what the specifics of this were, Jeffrey. If just in theory, Tommy Rees doesn't want other strong voices, that's a problem. And at the time, I had big concerns about it. But here's the thing. Once they went and got Dylan McCullough, that kind of changed my view on it, because if you don't like strong voices and people with strong opinions, you don't go push for Dylan McCullough as your running backs coach. And you don't push for Harry Heastand to be your O-line coach, because that's two dynamic personalities that have very strong reputations that are considered the best of the best. So do I have some concerns about that? It depends on the specifics. And again, my concerns have been somewhat alleviated as they filled out the staff. I mean, that's just kind of, that's my thought. I mean, do you agree? I mean, you don't go push for, and from what I'm told, Tommy was the one that said, I really want that guy with Dylan McCullough. He's the guy that went to Coach Freeman and said, hey, we got to get Harry back. And and Coach Freeman was like, yep, yes, we do. Like, it was Tommy that kind of made that push. Tommy Rees does not push for Dylan McCullough if he wants to be the only strong voice in a room.
Mm-hmm.
Or he doesn't know Dylan McCullough at all, or Harry Heastand at all, and we know that that's not true.
Well, I was going to say, and I was going to say, I know you alluded to Harry Heastand as well, but like, he's a strong voice, obviously, as well. And Coach McCullough is known for, being very vocal and being that type of personality as well. So yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the actions speak loudest, right? Mm-hmm. So if he signed off or spearheaded the march to get guys like Dylan McCullough and get the Harry Heastand back, I feel like that's all the answers that you need to that question, right? Is the fact that I think he's willing to, collaborate. At the end of the day, though, he is the offensive coordinator, so he has the overall arching say and he has the final say, but there's nothing wrong with being a guy that takes things in and then makes the best possible decision. I know some people obviously are not open to that type of conversation from an offensive voice perspective, but I think the actions kind of speak that he's at least willing to listen to it and at least willing to hear it. You know what I mean? So,
yeah. So again, I think we can all take different takes on that, and I think Tommy Rees has become a bit of a lightning rod with Notre Dame fans lately, because he's kind of the last holdover of the Brian Kelly era, and I think Tommy's getting a lot of arrows that are really secretly, it's like they've got a Tommy Rees picture and they put Brian Kelly's face on it, and now they're shooting arrows at it. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's kind of what we're seeing with a lot of this. We'll see. Tyler Bedwell, just answering this quickly. Is Notre Dame seriously interested in Harris Sewell? Seems like a mauler on the interior. Seems like a lesser-rated Quentin Nelson. I don't think Harris Sewell is a priority for Notre Dame right now. I think there are much better prospects that they're looking for. And again, I don't think Notre Dame's going to be recruiting a ton of pure interior guys. Not as many. There'll be some, but not as many. And right now, I don't think Harris Sewell is a guy that's on the board based on what we've talked about. David Solomon says, don't understand why Swarbrick and Notre Dame didn't want expansion. Notre Dame has no margin for error. That's false. We saw it the last 2 years, 12-0 in 2020, and we're in. 11-1 in 2021, we're out. Finishing 12-0 is our only chance. Notre Dame was not 12-0 in 2020. Notre Dame was 10-1 and got in the playoffs in 2020. No, so their last game they lost, 34-10? They lost the ACC title game and still got in. This notion that Notre Dame has to be 12-0 is utterly false. And there's verifiable data to prove it. Number one, half of Notre Dame's playoff appearances came with a regular season loss. Okay, number one. Number two, Notre Dame climbed up to number 4 in the rankings in 2015 with a loss. Then they went out and laid an egg against Wake Forest, played like crap against a terrible BC team, and then that got them knocked out. And then, of course, they finished by losing to Stanford. 2017, Notre Dame loses at home to Georgia at the beginning of the year. They climbed all the way up to number 3 in the rankings before getting blasted by Miami. No one can make a legitimate argument that Notre Dame would rise up to number 3, beat a top 10 Miami team on the road, beat a top 25 Stanford team on the road in the last 3 games, and fall out of the top 4. You can't make a rational argument that would have been the case. So this notion that Notre Dame has no margin for error has zero support from the standpoint of actual data. The reason Notre Dame is 11-1 and out in 2021 is because here's the number of top 25 teams Notre Dame beat in 2021. That's the list. Nobody. You know what I mean? Like that's the reality of it. If Notre Dame would have beat Cincinnati, and let's say they would have lost to Florida State in the opener. Let's just say it, right? Losing overtime. Bad loss. We've seen teams with similarly bad losses get in the playoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Ohio State lost at home by 2 touchdowns at the beginning of the 2014 season to a Virginia Tech team that went 7-6.
Yep.
Okay, but then they beat a bunch of ranked teams. If Notre Dame loses there and then blasts Cincinnati at home or beats Cincinnati at home, guess what? Notre Dame's in the playoff. Cincinnati's not. Or at least Notre Dame's got a better resume because they'd have a better win. You can't argue that you should have been in with a loss when you beat 0 ranked teams. I'll say this right now. If a team from the SEC or the ACC or the Big 10 or Big 12 or Pac-12 made the playoff at 11-1 with 0 wins over a ranked team, we as Notre Dame fans would rightfully be infuriated.
Sure.
So we can't then make the case that Notre Dame should have been in with a loss to the only ranked team they played all year. And when I'm talking about ranked team, I'm talking about how you finished.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that's the reality of it. You got to beat people. It's not about the loss. It's about you had no wins. Because Notre Dame just came off a season in which they had a loss that was far more of a convincing loss to a playoff team, right, than the one they just had. And let's not forget, Notre Dame got in with a loss in 2020 over a Cincinnati team that went undefeated. Cincinnati was undefeated in 2020, and Notre Dame still got in with a loss, right? And it wasn't because they had, because why? Because they beat Clemson. They beat the number 1 team in the country. They had a great win. They handled their business. So and the other part is your premise is wrong. Jack Swarbrick is voted for expansion. He was part of the committee that made the expansion proposal. So I don't think that Notre Dame and Swarbrick don't want expansion. Swarbrick has been a big proponent of expansion. He is not, as far as I know, he has had some other proposals he liked for expansion in a different way. But as far as I know, Jack Swarbrick has never been a no, it's got to stay at 4 person. I think he sees value in there being more opportunities for Notre Dame because there's still some teams we mentioned that would have got in, for Notre Dame that didn't get in. So I would disagree with that, a lot of that premise. Terry Washburn says the new defensive coordinator says, let me evaluate and come up with the system. Does this mean we could see a new wrinkle to the defense, or is he deciding between 4-3 and 3-4? I think you misread what he said, Terry. Ryan, I don't know if you heard Coach Golden's comments, but what he was saying was, look, first of all, he's not going to come up with a brand new system. That's been made very clear. They're going to incorporate a lot of stuff that was already here because that's what the players do well. Yep. What he's saying is I'm going to evaluate the players and then kind of figure out kind of the different things that we're going to do. It's not about deciding 4-3 or 4-3-4 because neither of those are going to be the options. It's going to be, a 4-2-5, a 3-3-5, like kind of a hybrid like it's been. Now, he is going to run the defense. It's going to be his defense, but he's accepting certain principles and philosophies that Marcus Freeman likes and feels the town is built around. So I think you're taking that comment a little bit too not literally, because I think he meant it literally, but you're taking it to an extreme that I don't think he intended in regards to he has no clue what he's going to run, but he's got to watch the players first. I think it's like we know who we're going to be, but what do we do more 4 down or 3 down? Well, it depends on the players. We're going to do more zone or man. Well, that depends on the players. I have zone concepts I like. I have man concepts I like. Which one are we going to live more on is going to be determined by the players. I have about 15 blitz packages I love. We're only going to carry 5 or 6 of them in a year. That's just how a lot of coaches are. Like, I got all these great concepts, but we're only going to carry a certain amount. Are we going to be more of a blitz team because of the talent we have, we don't have? I mean, I got to know what I have first before I'm going to do that. Right? I said, do you like to run on 1st and 10 or throw on 1st and 10? My answer is going to be, okay, what kind of team do I have? What's the opponent? Good. You know what I mean? There's always got to be that kind of context to it. Ryan, do you have anything to
I mean, he's coming off a Super Bowl, right? He just accepted the job. He probably hasn't seen everybody, right? He hasn't seen what his team looks like, and he needs to understand what he has at his disposal in order to understand what the team is best. I honestly dislike the question sometimes because for me, if you're a true defensive guy and you understand how to utilize things best, then you're not a base 4 front or you're not a base 3 front. You're whatever your team is best, right? Like you kind of curtail and you cater to what your team does best. So I think, like you said, it's going to be on multiple fronts because it has been traditionally under Marcus Freeman. There's going to be a philosophy that's in place, but from there, it's Coach Golden to decide what he does with it. And I think that he's going to he's had experience in both 3-man fronts and 4-man fronts during his coaching career. So I'm not worried about the battle between, is it a 4-man front? Is it a 3-man front? I think it'll be whatever is best in the certain situation. Ideally.
Yep. Here's an interesting one. Connor Patton. Hey guys, thank you for the super chat, Connor. I haven't seen you in a little bit. Hey guys, remember when all the assistant coaches came out to praise Brian Kelly's recruiting? How can that be analyzed with our current knowledge? Let me first say it should be analyzed now the same way I analyzed it then. And that was, it wasn't all the coaches, it was 2. It was Mike Elson and it was Brian Polian. Brian Polian was the biggest hype man that I've ever seen for an assistant coach. I mean, it was, hey, Coach Kelly, you want me to dance? I'll dance. You want me to tap dance? You want me to say how great you are? Because that's who he was. That's how he got to where he got to. That and his last name. I'm just going to keep it real with you, okay? Mike Elson was a good soldier. And as the recruiting coordinator, he has to push back against certain narratives. There was no coach that I know that ever talked to me off the record about how good Brian Kelly was as a recruiter. Not a one. Not a one. So that there's a reason it was just those 2 coaches. You've never heard Marcus Freeman get out and talk about how great of a recruiter Brian Kelly was. He mentioned, coach, and because he's your freaking boss. You can't come and say, it'd be nice if we had a head coach who would make a flipping phone call every now and then. You can't do that. But the hype men, especially Brian Polian, those are the guys that kind of come out and do the whole, when you come out that forcefully and defend your head coach on a signing day about his recruiting, it's agenda driven, not me. If you're doing it with Marcus Freeman because you just signed the #1 class, that's a different deal. But this was pushing back against the narrative that Brian Kelly wasn't doing A, B, C, and D, and they were trying to push back against that narrative. It was a narrative driven as opposed to fixing it by just doing a better job. In typical Brian Kelly fashion, he would fix it by, let's change the narrative as opposed to actually fixing the problem. And that's right. I can see you got some stuff you want to say about this, Ryan.
Well, no, I was just going to, and you took it before I was going to kind of put it out there. If there is a need to defend someone, usually that's a big red flag that, it's probably not all squeaky clean, right? So I think that's kind of, the minute that someone has to come and defend your ability as a recruiter probably tells you all you need to know. I don't think that you're going to have to see anybody, at least not in the near future here, have to come out and say, oh, Marcus Freeman's a great recruiter on staff, because it's just known. It is assumed. You do not have to verify that. Things that are known commodities do not need verification, and they do not need people standing up for it, right? Like, those things are well known. The fact that people had to come to the forefront and defend tells all the narrative that you need to know. It tells the full story, in my opinion.
Right. Agree completely. Jojo Pineda with a question. I just got asked this by somebody on my Twitter feed or on my text message. So I assume somebody put a story out about Chris Vizina, I'm assuming. But Jojo Pineda asks if Vizina, that's Chris Vizina, the quarterback from Alabama.
Yeah.
If Vizina wants to pick Notre Dame before Moore chooses, then what does Notre Dame do? I want Moore, and Mike Singer from On3 is putting a prediction we might get Moore. First of all, I don't know why Jojo, you listen to the show every day. I don't know why we need to throw out Mike Singer's opinion. This isn't a shot on Mike Singer, but I've been telling you this for how long? So you only believe it now because Mike Singer says so? You know what I mean? Like, I've been telling y'all for months that Notre Dame is in a good position with Dante Moore. I don't know how else I need to say it, right? We're not going to do the crystal ball thing. We're not going to do just listen to what we say. I mean, nobody's been paying attention to recruiting is all of a sudden should be all of a sudden, like for us recruiting, should be shocked that, oh, wow, people think Notre Dame's going to get Dante Moore. Duh. Been telling you this for a while, but honestly, Jojo, to answer the first part of your question, in most years, I'd say, I think you got to take Vizina because he's a really good player. He's a top 100 quarterback. I like him better than Jackson Arnold, Ryan. I don't know what you think of Chris Vizina. I'll ask you that in a second. In most years, I'd say, you know what? You got to take Vizina because he's a really good football player. But Notre Dame is in that unique situation where Dante's a special talent, and they are in desperate need of another elite quarterback. And I say another because I still believe Tyler Buckner can be that guy. But Dante is special. He's a great fit at Notre Dame in so many ways. Not even getting into the scheme fit, just 4.0 student, great leader, smart kid, wise, all those kind of things. Local. I think that this is the year because and I think here's the other part, Ryan. this 2023 class is so important to Notre Dame. Kind of like Notre Dame with 21 and 22, they got some big time players. 22 especially, like they're getting so much closer. This is the kind of class that can push you over the top, and you need that 5-star quarterback. Chris Vizina is a heck of a player. He doesn't quite move the needle from a everybody around him standpoint the way a Dante Moore does, the way Arch Manning would. It just that's just the reality. So I really like Chris Vizina as a player. It's just, I think in this situation, I think you have to see this one through. Especially since, like, kind of what you said, if people are saying Notre Dame's the leader for Dante Moore, why would you then panic and take another guy, Ryan?
Yeah. No, and it's a great point. I mean, and again, the answer to Jackson Arnold versus Chris Vizina for me, I guess, to start out with is I think Vizina has a higher upside to him, right? So, like, down the road, I could see him being a better college quarterback. I like both players, though, to be very honest. I would say at this point, Christopher Vizina is a quarterback that most years would be an easy take and the best quarterback that Notre Dame would have, probably over, in a little bit of stretch there. The big thing is, though, is that, again, you do not take the player when there's a quarterback 2.5 hours away that is very much in the conversation, right? Do not ruin the chance there. And I don't know. I just think taking the swing is, even if you think that there's some risk involved, that risk is worth the potential of losing Chris Vizina, because you could always circle back and try to rebuild that type of situation. So I just think that it doesn't make any sense right now to force that hand when you are putting yourself in a good position for potentially elite player that could take you to a different stage.
I would also say in most years, your take on Vizina, my take on Vizina would be true. I think the whole it's all in for Dante is a unique circumstance based on all these different factors kind of coming to a head at once. With it being Marcus Freeman's first year, with Tommy Rees needing to finally prove some things that I think I'm going to have an article about this weekend about kind of Tommy Rees and recruiting, about what a Dante Moore could do for him from a perception standpoint, not just a practical standpoint. With this being such an important class, Ryan, with coming up short at receiver the way you've done in recent years, like you've got to land an elite receiver class, and who helps you more with that. There's just so many things that have all converged at this one moment that makes this 2023 cycle unique. In a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if you're in a similar situation and you're not sure where you stand with a Dante Moore type, and you can get a Chris Vizina type, take them. I think this year is a unique circumstance, and you won't hear me making a lot of cases of being all in on a guy the way that I have Dante Moore. You just won't hear it often, but I think in this instance, I think it's needed. So, I think it's needed. And I just love this. Stymie Snerdley has been paying attention to our show for years. I hear Arch Manning is opening up his options to include a few more schools, ducks under the table to avoid flying objects. Well done, Snerdley. Well done. I dig that. So, JoJo, I think your question is good. I'm kind of busting your chops a little bit about the Mike Singer thing. I got no issues with Mike. This isn't a shot at Mike. It's just more of like I kind of feel like now that they're coming around to what we've been saying for months, it seems like it's new news, but this is what we've been saying for a while at Irish Breakdown. Patrick Barnes with a super chat. Thank you, Patrick. He asks, would you agree the upcoming season ceiling hinges on Tyler Buckner's production? Why or why not? Ryan, I'm going to give you first crack at this.
The absolute best of it. All right, let me rephrase this for a second. Okay, so I think that there's still a substantial floor to it, even if Tyler Buckner is good but not great. Like, if he's not as good as maybe we quite think he is, I still think that it's going to be a good football team, because I think that the defense is going to be good. I think the offensive line is going to be incredibly improved. I think that the playmakers are better than a lot of people give them credit for, and I'm a fan of the coaching staff they're putting around. So I think the baseline is to be a good team. Now, for this team to be a championship caliber team or competing for a national championship, potentially, Tyler Buckner has to be very good.
Right.
So that's the difference for me. So I don't think that it all hinges in the fact that either you're really good or you're really bad. I think that you could be good if Tyler Buckner isn't quite as good as we think he is. But if he is the player that we think that he can be and he takes those steps, then I think you're going from just being a very good team to being a championship level contender.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I don't think Tyler Buckner has to be Bryce Young for Notre Dame to be a playoff team this year. I don't. I think Notre Dame's going to have a better defense than Bama had this past year as a whole. I mean, there's no Will Anderson. Because I love Isaiah Foskey. He's not going to have 31.5 tackles for loss and 16 sacks in the regular season this year, right? But I think as a whole, I like what Notre Dame has coming back. I think Notre Dame has a chance to have a lot of talent around him. So I don't think it's like like you said, Ryan, if Buckner's really good, they're going to play off. If he's just okay, they're 6-6. It's not. He'd have to be bad, and I don't think he's going to start enough games when they go 6-6. Because if he's playing that poorly, Drew Pine's going to slide in and say, "I got this,"
Exactly.
But to your point, yes, Notre Dame can be a playoff team with Tyler Buckner being good. Notre Dame needs him to be really good to win a championship because the roster's not completely there yet, where they can just they can't just Stetson Bennett you, right? I mean, that's the other thing, right? And even then, I'd say if Bama doesn't have 3 bad injuries, they still win that game. Even if they just only have one of the 3 injuries doesn't happen, they win that game, in my opinion. They had 3. We're talking about Job, Mechie, and then obviously Jameson Williams during the game. But I think that if everything else plays great and Tyler's just okay, the ceiling is impacted to a degree.
Sure.
But I also would say if everything else isn't great, but Tyler's great, that still impacts the ceiling. So yeah, I think Tyler's production this year and is going to have a big say in what he does. Now, if Marcus Freeman hadn't made some of the coaching changes that we would make, I would change my tune on this. If Jeff Quinn, I don't mean this as a shot at Coach Quinn, because he really is a nice man. I do like him. He's just not a good O-line coach in my opinion, at least not at Notre Dame. But if Jeff Quinn was still this O-line coach, I would change my stance. I'd say no. It's going to be about the Buckner and the line. But there's some things I'm assuming are going to be true with this team. Like the line's going to be a lot better. The defense is going to be good. There's going to be a lot of skill players. There's a lot of things I think Ryan and I are both assuming that then allow us to say it's about Tyler Buckner. That's kind of my stance on that one.
I agree.
Yep. So, all right. That's a really good question, Patrick. I appreciate that. David Knight, Joe Moore, Harry Hiestand, or is that even a fair question? I think it's a very fair question. I don't think I can give you an answer because Joe Moore, I mean, when Joe Moore was still coaching, I was a teenager, right? So, I mean, I was just a Notre Dame fan. I wasn't like, man, did you see that hand placement on that down block? That was phenomenal, right? Like, it just wasn't where I was. I just remember they had great lines every year. I think Joe Moore, was considered a legend for a lot longer than Harry Hiestand has been because Joe Moore was at Pitt during some great Pitt teams back in the day too. So I would say he probably has I don't think Harry Hiestand was considered amongst now it's like pretty much everyone that doesn't have an agenda thinks Harry Hiestand's a great coach, right?
Sure.
But that didn't come along until being at Notre Dame for a little bit, right? Like I don't think when they hired him, people thought oh my gosh, Notre Dame hired a legend. Now you'll know this, right? In offensive line coaching circles, Harry was considered a legend, but not the way that Joe Moore was, just kind of the common perception with everyone. But I mean, let's not forget, Joe Moore was part of a national championship team at Pitt, I believe, right? Or at least a runner-up, I believe. So, he had some legendary lines at Pitt before he came to Notre Dame and was part of a national championship at Notre Dame. So, that would be the one thing that I think makes those two a little bit different.
I think it's impossible to answer in my opinion, just because, obviously comparing errors to a degree, but like you said, I haven't studied Joe Moore's technical aspects of coaching the offensive line position. Right. So we don't know. As teachers, they may be very close together, but obviously Joe Moore has the reputation and has that legend, that legacy that has transcended and now has an award named after him. So I guess by default, we're going to go Joe Moore, but I'm not educated enough on the technical aspects of what Joe Moore taught to have an actual fundamental evaluation of him as a teacher and as a coach.
If we're talking entirety of a career, correct.
And
now,
Moore.
Right. But here's the thing, because I'm looking at it like, so 76 was the only unquestioned championship Pitt had, but in 80 and 81 they had uncontested championships. But there was a 3-year stretch with Pitt and Joe Moore was a part of that entire thing. He was at Pitt from 77, so the year after they won the national championship, through 85. Right, so that was spanned 3 different coaches. But there was a stretch in there in 79 to 81. Where they went 11-1 3 straight years and won the Fiesta Bowl, won the Gator Bowl, won the Sugar Bowl. And, he produced some dudes. I mean, I think Jimbo Covert, right, was one of his offensive line proteges back then. So that's a lot of success. Now, if Notre Dame has a similar success over the next few years and they finish number 2 a couple times and they have a couple unclaimed national titles, because remember back then there wasn't just one clear title. It was the UPI gives one, the AP gives one, So they won some titles. It just wasn't the main one that gives you the one that you claim. So, if Pitt is claiming titles the way that Alabama claims title, Joe Moore has 2 national championship rings at Pitt, right? I mean, and then of course he won one at Notre Dame. Well, that's kind of the thing that's missing from Harry's legacy. If that changes over the next 5 years, then Harry's legacy changes. But as of today, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the Joe Moore Award, not the Harry Hiestand Award, right?
Right.
Now,
so
Harry Hiestand is responsible for Notre Dame being O-line U, because when Joe Moore was here in the 90s, that wasn't a thing.
Sure.
That wasn't an expression. So that would be my response. Here's a good one for you, Ryan, because I know you have some very strong opinions on this quarterback, one of these quarterbacks being mentioned. If Bevan O'Neill asks if Tyler Buckner takes a leap and plays well, what's the player comp for him? And we've talked about this before, but he gives some specifics.
Mm-hmm.
He asks about Matt Carroll, Sam Howell, or Samuel Sanders. I don't know who Samuel Sanders is. I have no clue who that is.
Is that Spencer Sanders?
No clue.
Okay,
so let's go with the first two, Matt Carroll or Sam Howell.
Okay, so Matt Corral from Ole Miss, who, if you watch Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss passing attack, they run very heavy RPO system. A lot of easy reads for a guy like Matt Corral, which that's kind of the big question about him right now. Is it's not like a traditional drop back system. There's not like a plethora of reads going through, and he's kind of a lightly built type of pocket passer who's got some extension ability, but I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a great runner on the next level. He's kind of one of the assumed guys. Sam Howell on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. He's in Phil Longo's offense, which is, air raid elements, and he's a big, strong passer who was, I think he's got maybe the best deep arm in this year's class, right? Like his accuracy deep down the field is fantastic. He drops it in the bucket. Just extremely consistent working down the field. Now, some of the underneath stuff is a tick slow because he's just and that's honestly a product of that Longo offense a lot, right? Like if you know the air raid, it's running on a vertical plane a ton, and that's kind of how Phil Longo runs it on the outside. Think of like DK Metcalf when he was at Ole Miss, where he was running pretty much just fades down the sideline the majority of the time. So that's kind of strategically what it looks like there. Sam Howell also did a lot better as a runner this year than you would have anticipated outside of structure. So if you're asking me who he compares most to, I guess I would say Sam Howell, even though I think that Tyler Buckner is a much better athlete than Sam Howell. I don't see the comparison between Matt Corral at all, because he's kind of a lightly built guy, more of a, quick twitch guy than maybe a straight line runner. And I don't know. I don't think it's a fair comparison in either sense, though. So very different style quarterbacks. And Bevan O'Neill, if you would like to put into the chat at some point who the third person is.
I'm looking for it, and I don't.
There's definitely nobody in the class in 2022 for NFL draft that is Sanders. So unless you meet Spencer Sanders from Oklahoma, I'm not 100% sure who that third person is.
Spencer Rattler?
Rattler went back to school too, though. He's at South Carolina
Spencer
now.
Sanders?
Spencer Sanders is from Oklahoma State, the quarterback.
Oklahoma State, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe that might be who he's referring to. There you go.
Well, Spencer Sanders is sort of similar to Matt Corral. Like he's a little lightly built player, decent arm. I think he has a pretty strong arm, good athlete. Everything is just very erratic and inconsistent. Footwork is kind of a hot mess, but he's got some dual threat ability to him.
Notre Dame made him look a lot better than he actually is.
Yes.
They made him look a lot better than he is. I do not like the Matt Corral comparison for Tyler Buckner at all.
In no way.
Yeah, especially character and all that kind of. To me, I think the part you hit on that was good there is I don't know how Matt Corral would handle running Tommy Rees's offense. I don't think he'd handle it well at all. And I think that Lane Kiffin did a great – I actually think Lane Kiffin had one of his best coaching jobs this year because, Ryan, you and I talked a lot about Matt Corral in 2020, very, very turnover-prone quarterback. And very, like, he's just going to have those days where he looks like he's a first-round pick, and then he's going to have those days where he looks like this kid shouldn't be on scholarship, right? I mean, that's just kind of how he was. And you want an example, go watch last year's LSU game or Arkansas game. He threw 11 interceptions in those two games combined, right? I think what they did a great job of this year was limiting a lot of his reads, even more so, making the run game an even greater part of what they did, which took a lot of pressure off him from the need to have to go out there and put the team on his shoulders game after game after game. And so I think those are things this year that I think helped him. And they kind of built – now, they didn't run the ball a lot more than they did last year, but they ran the ball, in my opinion, more effectively than they did last year. And they built around the run game, where in the past it was like the run game was a kind of a complement to the throwing game. This year, the throwing game, I felt, was a complement to the running game more than it was in the past at Ole Miss, which I think is a byproduct of him knowing what he had at quarterback. That's what
exactly. And it's so troubling because obviously a lot of people are talking about Matt Corral potentially being a first-round quarterback in this draft, and it's just the biggest red flag for me that for a quarterback to be his best and for a team to be its best, you limited the authority that he had on the offense and the ability to make decisions. Like, they literally were like, we are going to simplify this even more than a Lane Kiffin offense is simple to begin with. We're going to take it even a step back because we know that you have the volatility aspect to your game. I just think that's a massive red flag when thinking about a guy like Corral.
Yeah. Have you thought of a better comp for Tyler Buckner? It's just so hard because we haven't seen Tyler Buckner playing in college as his whole game. He played when he got on the field on Saturdays this year. It was to play in a specific, narrowly defined role. And I think we, as all Notre Dame fans and analysts, let's see him go play a couple full games first before we start kind of pigeonholing him into a certain type of quarterback. That would be my comparison. But between those two, I think you're right. It's Sam Howell's the better of the two.
A little closer, yeah.
Yep. Gideon Rosa, Notre Dame football. If Notre Dame lands Dante Moore, how good of a chance do you think we have to land Cardinal Tate?
It drastically improves, I would say. And I would say that Notre Dame's in a pretty good spot as it stands, and it would be much better if they landed a guy like Dante Moore. Yeah. Absolutely.
Ryan's more optimistic on Carnell than I am because him and Sean have talked and Sean has interviewed Carnell. I honestly feel like if they don't get Dante, they won't. They're not a package deal. I'm not saying that, but I think that just the way that Cardinal Tate's recruitment has kind of gone, and some things I hear, I think that for him to pick Notre Dame, it's going to require them to get Dante Moore. I hope I never have to find out. I hope I have to never find out the opposite. If they don't get Dante Moore, because I'd like to get not Dante Moore, but Ryan is correct. It greatly increases their chances. No question about it. David Knight asks, this is an interesting one. Let's say Tyler Buckner has a productive year and Notre Dame was fortunate enough to get Dante Moore. What happens then? They duke it out in the spring and fall camps?
I mean, I'm always a fan of competition, right? So, like, I'm not going to bring in Dante Moore just to not compete. You would think, though, if Tyler has a productive year, my assumption would just be that he'd be too good to keep off the field, right? And he would just kind of have the upper hand because he has the experience factor. But, I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to bring in a 5-star caliber player to the degree that we both believe Dante Moore can be, and just bring him in and just say, nah, you should take the year off. We'll start this up next year.
Even if, like, the only time you could get away with that is if you brought a guy in during Trevor Lawrence's final year. Like, look, dude, Trevor's our guy. But even then, you're still preparing every day. Like, you're a Trevor Lawrence injury away, and especially in 2020, a Trevor Lawrence COVID-19 positive test away for being the starting quarterback. You've got to get a guy ready. But to your point, you don't recruit a guy like Dante Moore and say, hey, man, come in, sit for a couple years, and then you'll get your chance. He has to know that he's not being handed anything. I mean, because Tyler Buckner's a good player. but he also has to understand that you're going to get your shot. And Tyler needs to understand that, and just like Tyler, when he came in behind Drew Pine, understood that, it wasn't like, hey, you're going to come behind and sit behind Drew Pine for 3 years. You're going to get your chance to compete. And if you're the best guy, you're the best guy. I also think when we say how does Tyler have a productive year, I think it depends on what kind of productive year. If he has a Bryce Young type year, let's be honest, Dante's not beating him out, right? Barring injury. But if he has a productive year in that he has an Ian Book caliber year, yeah, Dante Moore should get a chance to push him. So I think it also depends on number one, what type of production we're talking about, but number two, what's behind that production. Is it because Tyler's growing and he's evolving, he's making great reads, or is it like they're running like a lot of RPOs, Ryan, and he's throwing 5-yard hitches that guys are turning into 50-yard gains? I mean, there's so much to it, but to Ryan's point, none of that matters, because at the end of the day, well, it matters, but like at the end of the day, none of that's going to change the fact that when you bring in a Dante Moore, you give him a chance to battle, right? I mean, that's the reality, because that's when a kid like Dante comes in and he gets a chance to compete, when you've been beat out, when the other guy's further along than you. I wouldn't say more talented than you, because I don't think anyone's going to be more talented than Dante when he shows up as far as throwing the ball. But when you watch Tyler Buckner do some things he does, and you see his command of the offense and all those kind of things, you're going to be like, look, I'm not happy I got beat out, but I get it. That's why a Bryce Young is going to not be happy. Was it you that brought this up the other day, where he was not happy that he got beat out, but then he learned from it and it just made him a better player? I think that was you that brought that up.
I don't think so.
Maybe it was Sean. See, this is what I love. We have so many more guests now. It's not just me and Vince all the time. I don't even remember who said stuff. But you usually really good players know when that dude was just a dude beat me out, right? I need to know where my game needs to grow. What you don't want is when a guy, to your point, Ryan, if you get into camp and, hey, he's our starter, and I'm like, dude, I'm out playing this dude every day, and they still keep trotting him out there starting a lot. That's when you see guys transfer, right? That's when guys leave. Kyler Murray sat for a couple years behind Baker Mayfield because he knew that guy's really good. I'm going to get my chance, and I'm going to do this. Right? Tua sat behind Jalen Hurts, right, because he knew he was going to get his chance. Mac Jones sat behind both of them because he knew, I got to keep working. They're better than me right now. I'm going to get my chance. As long as a kid feels he's been given a chance to compete, and he sees that the guy in front of him is just better than he is right now, guys like that will stay more often than not. And Dante strikes me as the kind of kid that's going to understand, again, if he picks Notre Dame in the first place, he's thinking bigger picture. If he wants to start day one, he's going to go to Michigan State, right? I mean, that's the deal. He knows he's come to Notre Dame where not only is he going to have to battle Tyler Buckner, but Notre Dame's going to go out and try to get another big-time quarterback the next year and the next year and the next year. That's why, I mean, do you think anybody goes to Bama with thinking, yeah, they're not going to recruit him in my position in the next 3 years? No. They know I got to beat out a dude in front of me, and I got to watch out the dude that's going to come behind me. And I think most great players aren't fazed by that. And if he is fazed by that, then he's not a guy you want anyway, because you're not going to win with that guy, Ryan.
I saw a projected, I think it was the running back depth chart for Alabama next year, and I think their fifth stringer was a 5-star recruit on a ranking and stuff. I think it's understood, especially when you're building a team in theory for Notre Dame that is going to compete for championships. Like, you have to know that there's going to be competition everywhere, and that's what Alabama. I mean, there's guys on Alabama every single year that break out, right? But look back and you're like, oh, well, he was still a 4-star kid. He was still a 5-star kid. He just had to wait his turn. And I think when you're building a program like that, that's just I think it's just an understood thing. Like, you're not going to take it to the next level if you're afraid of competition, for sure. And it's just something that you can't be afraid of. And for coaches to be open to it. I know we've seen a lot of people in not only in this chat, just in general from Notre Dame sense, that are like, why are Notre Dame afraid to play freshmen? Why are they afraid to play young players? Coaches can't be afraid of it. And if they're the best players, they have to play. But in this scenario, again, assuming Tyler Buckner has a really productive year and he took that big step and he's the guy that we think he is, you would expect that a freshman quarterback in Dante Moore would not beat out a junior quarterback in a Tyler Buckner. Mm-hmm. But still, you have that opportunity on the table and you let Dante Moore compete because you're trying to get to a point where competition breeds success. It can't be something where you're just like, nope, you're good. These are our guys. You guys sit over there. Because then, like Brian said, those players are they get a little salty off to the sideline, man. And they're like, wait, why am I not getting a chance to compete? I'm playing to this high of a level. Why am I here? Why did they bring me in if they're not going to let me compete? There's a lot of layers to it, and I think that you have to let these guys compete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very well said. Very well said. There's a couple questions I'm going to have that I'm going to really look forward to seeing you answer, but I'm going to kind of work down to them, right? Here's a super chat from Garth Cassidy. Thank you, Garth. He says, is Tyler going to be Charlie Whitehurst? And if we get Dante, he would be our Taj Boyd? No. First of all, Tyler Buckner and Charlie Whitehurst do not belong in the same conversation. I know Charlie played in the NFL for a while, but no.
That's clipboard Jesus, man.
Yeah, it's a great yes. Has he been supplanted by Chase Daniel yet, or is that still a thing?
Oh no, Charlie Whitehurst is clipboard Jesus, man. He lasted a long time.
Yeah, no doubt, and didn't play. And when he did, he was terrible. If anything, if we're going to use the Clemson analogy, if anything, Tyler Buckner would be Taj Boyd, and Dante would be Deshaun Watson. But let's not just like this is the one bad thing about recruiting. Is we're starting so early now, like we're already writing off a freshman on the team for a junior in college or high school, right? Like for all we know, Tyler Buckner is going to have a chance to be Deshaun Watson and Dante Moore is going to be Trevor Lawrence, right? Like, I mean, I think those are far more likely than Tyler's going to be Charlie Whitehurst and Dante's Taj Boyd. I don't know what you think about that, Ryan, but I have very strong. I think if it's going to be one or the other, it's going to be Taj Deshaun or Deshaun Trevor as opposed to Charlie and Taj.
Now, I'll leave it short because I agree completely. I'm not going to compare anybody to Charlie Whitehurst, man. I didn't even dislike Charlie, but like, yeah, different type of player, different caliber of player, in my opinion, different level of talent.
Yes. All righty. So let's get to the next one. Thank you for that again, Garth. David Lowe, what other options are we looking at besides Dante Moore?
Okay.
Referring to Notre Dame.
Yep. So we mentioned Christopher Vezina a ton, right? He's out of Alabama. Just got a Clemson offer pretty recently. Avery Johnson's another kid in Kansas who's a little bit, again, quote unquote, on the back burner right now. Notre Dame's not pushing as hard right there. And then Jackson Arnold's the other big guy who was committed to Oklahoma out of Denton, Texas. So those are the four guys that are high on the board. They're also keeping tabs on Marcus Stokes, who is a quarterback that has not been offered, but they're just, keeping in contact just in case, it's almost like a plan B type of conversation, seeing what the board might fill out with in case they do not get a guy like a Dante Moore. But the board, as follows: Jackson Arnold, who's committed to Oklahoma, Christopher Vezina out of Alabama, Avery Johnson out of Kansas, and then Marcus Stokes is just another guy to kind of file away just in case things don't go well with Dante.
Next question from David Fryman. He says, which Notre Dame player hits the weight room the hardest and what's their best lift, both on the current team and all time? I just had to read this. This was just a funny question because I have no idea. Yeah. I have no clue.
I mean, I can't imagine what Quentin Nelson was doing in the weight room.
Gosh. What did he put up at the combine? Didn't he get into the 30s on the bench?
He had to be mid-30s, I would think. Yeah. I think McGlinchey, it wasn't 30s, but I think McGlinchey did 25, which wasn't bad for his arm length, Yeah.
Yeah.
For his arm length, because I think he had 34, 35-inch arms. So, it's not, for people that don't know, bench press is a short arm guy thing, right? That's not, you don't want long levers and that type of thing.
That's why Will Hernandez was able to put up so many.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Because the point is, it has further to travel.
Right. Exactly.
It's like those longer limb dudes. It's that bar doesn't have to go real far. Exactly. With those kind of guys. So what I did want to say though is I think that what I would find fascinating is a conversation of which lifts are most important to which positions. I think is a really important one, right? So I think those are there are some positions where I think power clean, and things along those lines are the best things. There's others where squat's kind of important. I would say that I don't think bench is the most important for any others, but bench is going to tell you a lot more about an offensive lineman, defensive lineman than it's going to tell you about a wide receiver. Why? Because bench is applicable to playing in the lines. You get a guy on your body, you need to press him off. Well, that's a bench press. Receivers aren't doing a whole lot of this, right? I mean, if you know what I mean, it's just, even blocking, it's more stay in the guy's way. You know what I mean? Don't let him get past you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing about Quentin Nelson's, he did 35.
35.
He also has 34-inch arms. That's what, again, another reason it's just absurd that he was able to put up those kind of numbers, because, I mean, 34-inch arms to put up 35 bench press is just, I mean, that's a powerful, powerful dude. But, you know, those are, and I'll say this, I do, if you're ever going to talk to me about I brought up Will Hernandez. He did 37 on the bench. He has 32-inch arms. It's good 2 inches shorter, right? Like that stuff kind of matters.
I can't remember who broke I think it was Stephen Paya that came out of Oregon State, defensive tackle. I think he was only like, he was like 295 or 300 pounds, and he put it up like 47 times, 48 times, some crazy number like that.
It was an insane number. Yeah.
It didn't even make sense.
Yeah. And he was, I'm trying to
short arm guy.
Yeah. I'm trying to pull up his 32 and 8 was his deal. And I'm trying to find 49 reps.
40. Yeah, I think he has the combine record, 49 reps, which is just
absurd.
Nuts.
I think about that's 14 more than Quentin Nelson.
It's nuts, man.
It's absurd.
And 32 and some 32 and some change. It's not like the shortest arms of all time either. Like it's shorter, but it's not like crazy small.
I've always wanted to kind of watch that one because I'm like, hold on a second, let's actually count these. Did he have like one of those like really nice, evaluators that day that was giving it, like some of those guys, I'm like, how did he not count that one? Like that looked good to me, because because the other thing too is it's not like you get those dudes in the weight room that are like, and like it's like two half. No, you got to get extension on that thing too. Like you can't just do like those dudes that those guys at the gym that are going like halfway and they're kind of 5, 6.
Out.
No,
lock
that's
out.
one, that's 2, that's 3. It's a whole different deal, man.
Yeah,
whole different deal. Absolutely.
The craziest one. It's a completely different segue, but I saw a video circulating the other day of Larry Allen, right, where he was
the
he
Cowboys
had like
dude.
Yeah, he said DeMarcus Ware said he walked into the weight room and he was on the incline bench and he had 10 he told DeMarcus, hey, put 5 plates on. And he was like, wait, how am I supposed to split 5 plates on 2 sides? He's like, oh no, 5 plates on each side. And it was like, and he put chains on. So it was like 550 pounds. And he said he repped it 10 times on the incline bench and racked it himself. It was like, dude, what?
That's insane.
That doesn't make any sense, man. Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
And he went to Simona State, like just nuts, man.
Insane.
Nuts. Yeah.
Bevan O'Neill responded, Ryan, and he said he was talking about the Oklahoma, so Spencer Sanders was who he was talking about. So
thanks, Bevan.
Good catch on that one. Absolutely good catch on that one. Okay, let's get to some more questions here. In here, 808 Eds, if we land Dante Moore, do you think the difference between his play style and Buckner's play style will negatively affect our receiver recruits being a running quarterback like what happened with CJ? First of all, can I say something about CJ?
Yeah.
That narrative drives me flipping nuts because CJ committed to a Notre Dame offense that was far less effective production-wise than the offense he decommitted from, okay? Notre Dame threw for less yards per play. They were a worse passing team when he committed to Notre Dame than what followed his commitment. CJ was just kind of using that as like a thing to say, hey, he wanted to stay out west. Simple as that. But he didn't want to just say, I don't want to go away from home, because that doesn't sound like a real, like, oh, you're afraid to be away from your mama? Look, here's the reason. He didn't decommit from Notre Dame because of the offense. That's what pisses me off about that whole narrative is that's not why. Because Notre Dame was shredding late in the year. And if that's true, then why didn't he recommit to Notre Dame after Jack Cohn went out through for 500 yards in the Fiesta Bowl against one of the 10 best pass defenses in the country? That it's like when people say, "Oh, yeah, it's too cold there. It's the girls," or no, that's just an excuse that they're using because they just want to go there. I mean, so that really bothers me. But in reading your question, I don't think Dante Moore's style would negatively affect receivers at all. I think, and I'm not reading this correctly. I think if receivers are going to be impacted by a style, they're going to be more impacted by Tyler Buckner negatively than Dante Moore, because Dante's more of a passer where Tyler's more of a runner. Maybe that's what he meant. And I'm just not reading it correctly, which is certainly possible.
Is it short term versus long term? Is what what the question's asking?
Possibly.
I think there's an element of. I understand where the question's coming from. I would say that Again, I think Tyler Buckner is a little better passer than we're giving credit for. Is Dante Moore a more gifted passer? Sure, absolutely. Is the offense going to change? Not as so much from a schematic perspective, but just from a usage perspective. Yeah, like you're probably going to pass the ball a little more when you have a Dante comparative to a Tyler, because you're just going to run more quarterback run game. You're going to run more read. Like you're just going to do things a little bit differently than you would do with a Dante, but you're not going to drastically change the offense, in my opinion. Like the fundamentals and the philosophy are still going to be the same. So I understand the question. I don't think, though, to answer it, I don't think that it's going to negatively affect it at all. If anything, I think the wide receivers are going to be more concerned about long-term with Dante than like, oh, I have to play with Tyler Buckner for a bridge year, quote unquote, or something like that. You know,
if Tyler Buckner is exactly what he showed this year. And I think that's where I keep coming back to is this is a kid that threw for almost 5,000 yards as a junior in high school and over 50 touchdowns. Like, again, Tyler Buckner did what he did as a freshman because that was his role, right? And he's we'll just have to let it play out. All right, Michael asks, with Marcus Freeman's first staff now in the fold, are assistants hired with potential thought to possibly replace coordinators if they move on? Do Parker, Dealin, Mickens, Washington have upside to be OC, DC one day? I think Washington, of those four, the first one that pops out in my head is Al Washington, just because teams are already pursuing him for that. And I think his coaching, here's the unique thing about Al Washington. You don't see many former defensive linemen that were running backs coaches as full-time assistants. And he was that. So he's coached on offense for multiple seasons at Boston College, which means I always like those guys because, like, when you have coached on offense, you now know how they think, you know how they game plan, you know what kind of goes into it. I feel like you have an even better understanding, just like you have, offensive coaches that used to coach defense. And I think that's something that helped Brian Kelly early in his career when he actually worked at, being just the game. Is his background is that he played linebacker and was a defensive coordinator at Grand Valley before he became the head coach, and then eventually kind of transitioned to an offensive guy. And I think that's one of those things that, to me, Al Washington has that unique perspective, and just his resume, his background, listening to him talk. I think he's the first one that jumps out to me. I don't know if they hire Jared Parker with the thought of he'd be the guy to replace Tommy Reese if he leaves. I hope not. I hope
he does have experience as an offensive coordinator.
Yeah,
right?
He didn't call plays at West Virginia, but he was the coordinator. Right. I would hope that he would think bigger than that, to be honest with you. And that's not a knock on Coach Parker. It's just I don't know if that's like I don't love that unless it's a guy that's a real dynamic guy, and I just don't know enough about Jared Parker to say he's dynamic. I think Coach McCullough's next step will be as a head coach. I think he'll be one of those guys that goes from assistant to head coach. I don't think every coach has to go from, like Urban Meyer, Dabo Swinney, two guys that pop out at me. Neither of them were coordinators before they became head coaches. So I think Coach McCullough would be more bypassing the OC thing to go to the head coach. Although I could see a role. I was talking with a friend last night. I could see maybe a role where if Tommy left after this year, I'm not saying he's going to. I'm just the hypothetical of this. Is maybe Parker and Dealin working together as co-coordinators kind of situation like Clemson had with Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. So, but I do think Al Washington's a guy that if you can keep him here for the next 3-4 years, if Al Golden has success and then becomes a head coach again, Al Washington would be a guy that I would see transitioning in that role. Although by then, Al Washington might be a guy that people are coveting to be a head coach. And that's really where Marcus Freeman wants to be. He wants to be a guy that people are poaching his coaches to be head coaches and his assistants to be coordinators, because that makes it so much easier for you out and go get the next guy that's going to fill that role. Yeah, it's like players.
Well, we're seeing it with the Los Angeles Rams right now, right? Like every single year, their coaching staff is just getting poached for the next head coach, right? Like they're trying to find the next Sean McVay, and that makes it more attractive of a situation, because that's like a pipeline at that point. Out of the question, I would have said Washington as well, just because I know he's coached multiple positions and he has obviously the background and the reputation as a recruiter. So like that would be another big bump. I don't know enough about Coach Mickens to say like I just don't know enough. And like you said, Dealin McCullough is a little bit not older. I think he's 49. So he's not so he's not like an older guy, but he seems like he's on the precipice, like the next step to being a head coach type of situation as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you're 49 years old, you're not like, I'll go be a coordinator somewhere for 3 years, because now you're 52, and as we're seeing, there's a trend to hiring younger coaches. you know, and there comes a point in time where it's like you've kind of passed that window. And I think that's what happened with Tony Alford, and I hope that doesn't happen with Dylan McCullough. But that's why it's so important that Notre Dame have success, which I think they will, because I think then all of a sudden you start seeing some of that, you know, hey, he was with Andy Reid, he was there at Bieniemy, he won a Super Bowl. Look what we did at Notre Dame. You know, he groomed this guy, he produced this, he worked with Marcus Freeman, and you know, and that's where you want to be. Is your guys are leaving for those head coaching opportunities if they want them. And Dylan McCullough has not been shy about saying that's what he wants to be. That's why he turned down NFL jobs. He left the NFL in the first place, was he wants to be a college head football coach, which, you know, I hopefully that's the thing is you hope that Dylan McCullough is not here for 5 years, because if he's here for 5 years, it means he's getting turned down for head coaching jobs. You hope he's here for 3 or 4 and then gets that head coaching job. So that's absolutely, you want to root for those kind of things. It just, as long as guys are taking, you know, not lateral moves, and then that head coach maybe leaves, just like something like that. K Grant with a super sticker. Thank you very, very much for that. Timeout Tom says, I disagree with Brian. The offensive line is the most influential part of the team. Example is the 2021 season. A quarterback and an offense can't function without a good offensive line. I don't remember saying the opposite of that. I think what I said is we're working with the assumption that the line's going to be good, because if the line's not good, it doesn't matter. I thought that's exactly what I said. So I'm not sure what Tom you're agreeing or disagreeing with, because
this is arching back to the question about Buckner's ceiling, right? Like the team ceiling with Buckner.
Right.
So I felt like we were kind of both on the same wavelength, where we thought that, you know, we were assuming defense is going to be good, offensive line is going to be improved. So we're just hyper focused on the quarterback.
Because what I said was, if Jeff Quinn was still at Notre Dame, then the offensive line would be my biggest concern.
Fair question.
Perhaps I misspoke or misunderstood Tom, but I don't think we actually disagree on this one. I think we agree on this. It's just the difference is, for the premise of that conversation, I'm assuming that the line's going to be good. I think it is. If the line's not good, to your point, Tom, it doesn't matter how good the quarterback is, as we saw in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, you know, whose offensive line gave the quarterback more chances late in the game? You know, the Rams did, obviously. Benjamin says, listen to Harry talk about fundamentals and was very happy that he is back. And he even cracked a joke. So we don't have video of it. Irish Illustrated has some good video out on about this. And Harry was talking about, which is something we talked about on the show, is, you know, he was part of the reason he was out of coaching is he wanted to be with his kids, and his daughter was kind of going through high school and she was finishing, and he wanted to be around her. And he was talking about how I could be at her soccer matches, and he was like, I'd be there for all of them. And I didn't have to be worrying about, you know, Robert Hainsey's bad pass sets or Aaron Banks falling on the ground. This is really funny because I know how close he is with Robert Hainsey. And you don't often see Coach Easton like cracking jokes like that about former players. I thought that was pretty cool. It's like awesome. He just seemed looser to me. You know, it just I don't know.
Refreshed.
You know, because his kids are all out of the house now. He got that family time. He got a chance to see his daughter do that. His sons are now out of the house. It's like, okay, now it's just
good for him.
Now it's football. Awesome. Yeah. I always kind of joke. I wonder, like, once his daughter left, I wonder if his wife sat down and said, Harry, you need to get back into coaching, because I'm not going to be stuck in this house with you for 24/7, 365.
It's a fair question.
I know that's what my wife would probably say. I guarantee you that.
It's fair. You need to find a hobby or something. Yeah,
that's absolutely right. All right. Chris Hawk says, Al Gold's press conference got me excited hearing him talking about preparing for adjustments made after every series and problem solving. See this defense being top 5 with Colley and Mares. I think there was more to his question that Vince did not get to. But could it be a top 5 defense? Sure. But there's a lot that we need to see how the corners pan out. We need to see, you know, who starts at linebacker. There's how the staff works together. It's way too early for that. But I love the foundation that we've seen. And Ryan, I think that's one thing that, as we're seeing the college game become more and more complex, from and complexity can sometimes mean volume of scheme, and complexity sometimes can mean tempo, you know, because it's so hard to adjust. I think his experience in the NFL, of all the areas where it could help or hurt, I think the adjustments and the volume that he's had to face on a weekly basis from what they're throwing at him from series to series is going to be the thing that helps him really just be prepared for anything and be able to make those really fast in-game adjustments, to where not are you adjusting and always playing catch up, but you're adjusting and then you're leaping them and you're a step ahead. You know, I mean, that's the best adjusters aren't constantly playing catch up to what they're doing is, hey, they're doing this, so we're going to do this because it's going to hurt them. Not protect ourselves, not give up big places. We're going to do this because it's going to hurt them. That's what the best minds do, and I think that's something where I think Al Golden we could see that be a big benefit for Notre Dame.
Well, and everybody always hears me, I think, talk about, especially when I talk about defensive players a lot, like kind of evaluating as like proactiveness versus reactiveness. And I think it's the same in coaching, right? Like there's especially defensive, you think like you're reacting to what's coming in front of you and stuff. But there's like when you get really comfortable and you game kind of slows down, even as a play caller, there's more proactive, right? Like you think a couple steps ahead. It's like the chess versus checkers analogy, right? So I mean, Coach Golden's been doing this a long time, man. He's been on multiple levels. He's been on multiple roles. I'm excited about it just because everything I've heard, every person that I've talked to about Coach Golden has said nothing but positive things. So I'm excited to see what it looks like. And I mean, he has obviously a lot of talent to work with. So I think there's going to be a lot of adjustments, a lot of sub-package opportunities. And hopefully it gives more kids opportunity to play too, which I don't think Coach Golden will be inopportune to, getting some players on in kind of maybe simplistic roles early on, if that's kind of what their talent dictates. You know what I mean? So
we have a super chat from Q Kibbs. What about Tyrod Taylor for the Buckner comp? I think Buckner brings a lot more passing potential to the table than Tyrod.
Yeah. He's just
Tyrod seems like an older version of Jalen Hurts to me.
Yeah, that's a good comp. That's a pretty good comp. Yeah, I just think that, like, again, it's for a guy like a Tyrod when he was his best, and I think he took to the Bills to a playoff appearance at one point. He was just kind of a solid starting quarterback. You wanted to limit the impact that he had on the passing game or the responsibilities he had as a passer. So I don't think that you have to limit anything with Tyler Buckner. I just think that he needs time and you need to give him the opportunity to prove what the talent is, because the talent's there. It's, again, I know people, it's an excuse or whatever. His last 3 years of high school, he played one season, right? With the injury and the
experience
season canceled.
matters in that regards. Yeah.
Especially a quarterback. Like, that matters so much. So let's give the kid a little bit of time. I think he has a higher upside to that, but I understand where the comp is coming from, though.
Yeah. Here's okay. We're getting a lot of quarterback questions, and I think this speaks to what you just said, Ryan. And Guinea Pig Clip says, I've heard the wide receivers talking about Tyler Buckner, and they say give him time a lot. This kind of concerns me that they are talking about how he may be good in the future, like he isn't good now. It's not about being good. This is what so much of this is just like you take a comment and it says one thing, and then you take it and you just kind of turn it into something that the person that's saying it didn't mean. They're not saying, I think by 2025, Tyler Buckner is going to be ready. Nobody thought Tyler Buckner was ready to run the offense in 2021. Nobody, including Tyler Buckner. What they're talking about, and I've heard these comments, it's not so much give him time. It's more of like a wait till next year kind of thing. I mean, that's what I hear from people that I talk to. So I think some of us are reading our own emotions into comments, like our own feelings into comments, and kind of turning it into something that I don't think they were meant to be. I don't think any receivers are saying he's going to need time to be competent. What they're saying is obviously Tyler wasn't ready to be the guy last year, which we told you before the season he wasn't going to be ready to be the guy last year. But they see the potential. They see what he does in practice. He is doing some really impressive things in practice, and like, hey, look, this guy's going to figure it out, and he's going to be pretty good. Y'all need to be patient, because they're responding to people criticizing Tyler now, not people saying Tyler won't be good down the road. They're saying, oh, Tyler Buckner, isn't doing this and didn't do that. All the negativity we've seen in these chats about him. And a lot of it's from people that were anointing him as the savior after the spring. And we said, pump the brakes on it. So I think the biggest problem for Tyler Buckner this year was some people had unrealistic expectations for what he was going to do as a true freshman that had played 1 year of high school football. I think that's the bigger problem than anything Tyler Buckner did. Because for me, I thought he was better this year than I thought he was going to be. I did. I thought he was more dynamic. I thought he was bigger. I thought he did some things where his release looked cleaner than it did when he was doing, as a senior, when he was doing the camps and stuff. I'm excited about what Tyler Buckner can bring to the table. And I'm a little puzzled that there are so many people ready to just dismiss him, or people that don't understand that what they asked him to do this year isn't because that's all they think he can do. It's just that that's the element of his game that they needed in the offense. And that's why, hey, they had him do that. So, Ryan, anything you want to add to that?
No. Like I said, just give him some time. I think you're gonna be pleasantly surprised by what Tyler Buckner can do.
Agree. Joe Uribe, Brian, it always seemed to me like BK had a mindset of not playing freshman on offense unless his hand was forced. Was BK justified, or do you believe his mentality cost Notre Dame games they should have won? I think his mentality absolutely cost them games, and it wasn't just offense. I remember watching the 2011 game against Michigan as Denard Robinson's running all over the field, and I kept asking myself, where's Aaron Lynch and Stephon Tuitt? Where's your two best athletes? You're asking Carlo Calabrese to chase Denard Robinson around the field. You're asking Ethan Johnson to chase Denard Robinson on the field when you got these two freaky athletes on the field. Like, it wasn't just there. Do I think it cost them games they should have won? I don't think not playing freshmen did. I think, to your point, Joe, I think the way that Joe asked this question, Ryan, is good, because he doesn't say, does not playing freshmen cost Notre Dame games? He says, does his mentality cost Notre Dame games they should have won? And I think that's true, because the mentality is, we're going to run this really complex offense, and it's not about fundamentals as much as it's about scheme. And I think that mentality that then prevents you from playing players, because if you look at the best offenses in college football right now, they're relatively simplistic. What's the criticism that people have of Ohio State quarterbacks in recent years?
They're running a simplistic offense. They don't go through reads. That's like
right. That's what the criticism of some of the Oklahoma quarterbacks is. The criticism of air raid quarterback. I mean, so a lot of the dynamic quarterbacks in offenses in college football are running really simplified offenses, because it's about the technique and the talent. Brian Kelly's the polar opposite of that. It's about how smart I am. And my hope is that Tommy Rees is going to be sort of that bridge, because I don't think you have to just do – I believe there can be some complexity. I think you can go too far, and I think that there needs to be a focus on fundamentals. And I think as long as Tommy Rees can balance those two things together, I think this offense is going to be very, very explosive. And I do think that mentality did cost them some games they should have won, Joe. I think it's a very good question. Very good question. Ryan, you have thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say because I come from a long fandom, right? Like, my entire life I've been a Notre Dame fan. I mean, I'd be lying if I just sat here and said, like, during parts of the Brian Kelly era, I was like, wow, like, is there no young talent that can play? Like, I mean, right. I all the time, I'm just like, where are some of these freshmen? Because you see some of these older vets, these 4th, 5th year guys, where you're just like, I understand why they're playing, but also, can we get some of those other kids involved in some aspect? Like, I'm not saying to bench those guys to completely play the freshmen 60 snaps a game. Like, I'm not saying that, but like, can we mix something else in? Can we get some new bodies in? Can we see different skill sets? Like, there's got to be something. So I would be completely lying if that wasn't something that was frustrating at times as a fan, for sure.
Yeah. Timeout, Tom. Sorry for disagreeing with you. As an ex-O-line coach, I always defend the O-line. Tom, I'm not upset that you disagreed with me at all. I don't think we disagree. That's what I'm saying. I don't think you maybe in your, as an ex-O-line coach, you heard me say something I didn't say or misinterpret it. What I'm saying is, we said Tyler Buckner because we're assuming the line's going to be good. I mean, buddy, you've been on the show for a while. You've heard me rip the offensive line as being the reason the offense stinks for a while. So again, I don't have a problem with you disagreeing with me. I just don't think we actually disagree here. That's the difference. So I hope that we can finally get on the same page about this one. All right, let's get to a few more here, Ryan. Super chat from David Freeman. Can NBC offer an NIL package for various Notre Dame players? Ratings are way higher when the Irish are good. Hey, Dante, here's $1 million to star in our promos. I don't know how that works.
I don't know. Yeah,
I would imagine if they're going to have a guy run a promo that he could get paid for that.
Sure.
I would imagine, but I don't know if there's rules about like these networks and stuff. Like, can ESPN just start paying SEC players money to run promos? I honestly don't know the rules to that, David. I really don't.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, David. I don't know. I don't know what the ramifications of part of that is either. It's very interesting though.
But NBC's kind of cheap, so I don't know if they would do it anyway. So, but if that's allowed, that would absolutely be something that would be negotiated with me. And the next TV contract that we sign. If I'm Jack Swarbrick or whoever, if that's allowed under the rules, then that's flat out going to be part of my deal. If you're going to have players doing anything like promo wise, you're going to pay them. Or here's $1 million a year that you're going to pay us that we're going to then dispense to our players for you to use however you so choose. Right? Like, I would do something like that if it's allowed. And again, I've never even really thought about this until David brought the question up. I
yeah, because my immediate thought is, I mean, that would have to be something that is negotiated independently, right? Because then it's
so.
Yeah, that's man, David, that's a great question, man.
I don't know if the schools can have those negotiate. I don't like
right there's a
lot
player.
of right. So there's a lot of uncertainty of how it all works. So and that's what's so disappointing about this whole thing is they just kind of opened the floodgates and said, "What are the rules? We don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll make it up as we go along.
We go, yeah.
We might just not do anything because we're the NCAA and we're idiots." People say, our shows are too long. This is why we do it. Having to leave IB for a work meeting and then coming back to discover still going on is like finding dollar bills in the couch cushion. I love that, Alan. So here's the thing. I've had people say like, "Oh, the show's too long." Hey, look, if you only want to listen for 30 minutes, it's not a thing where if you start watching, you're not allowed to turn it off. You can turn it off after 5 minutes, but there's clearly a lot of people that like the longer shows. And as long as the people keep watching, we're going to keep doing them. And as long as we're not going to get to all the questions today, and we're 2 hours and 40 minutes in. There's about 50 questions we're not going to get to today. And our numbers are still as good as they've been. So if you don't like longer shows, it's cool, buddy. It's a free country. Turn it off after 20 minutes. Some people like the longer shows. And we've just found that the longer shows, as long as the content is good, allows because the people who like longer shows have no recourse if we turn it off after 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. Whereas the people who only listen for 30 minutes can turn it off and they can fast forward. They can, there's all types of things they can do. Okay. Blaine Tiller says, any thoughts on Maurice Crum being named the co-DC at Ole Miss this upcoming year? How about that? His, if I'm correct, Ryan, his O coordinator is Charlie Weiss Jr.
Yes.
And his D coordinator is Maurice Crum. So
that's
there's
awesome,
a Notre Dame connection at Ole Miss this year.
It was a blast from the past, man. I hadn't heard Maurice Crum's name in a long time. I'm like, oh, he's a good football player, man. I liked it a lot. Yeah. And then, like you said, the Charlie Weiss Jr. layer too. I'm like, wow, that's crazy that on one staff. But good for Maurice Crum, man. Again, I haven't heard his name in a while. It's really cool to see.
Wasn't he at Western Kentucky this year?
I'm not even sure. I
think he was at Western Kentucky, and their defense was not great this year. But I think a lot of that was he was the defense coordinator at Western Kentucky. I think a lot of that has to do with how they play offense because they
play the air raid too. They're
a true air raid. Like if we can score in 15 seconds, we're going to score in 15, and we're going to throw it a lot. And there's going to be more plays and things like that. But clearly Lane Kiffin saw something in him, so good for him. I always liked Mo Crum, man. He was on a couple of those revitalized Notre Dame, at least we thought, teams in 05 and 06.
He's a good player, man. Yeah. He's a good player. Yeah,
he was. This is just funny and petty, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. We were talking about Brian Kelly's work ethic. Stymie Snurdly said BK has twerk ethic. Just had to throw that up there. Excuse me. Irish One asks Brian, what was Notre Dame's best recruiting class in your opinion? So I can only go by my adult life. I can't compare a class since of now to the 90 class. I don't have the, again, the knowledge of what it was coming out. I would say that Notre Dame's best recruiting class, in my opinion, coming out of high school in the last 15 or so years was the 2013 class. And you think about the number of impact players that class brought. You had Malik Zaire at quarterback, who I still think would have been, he was pretty good when he was able to play. You had Torian Folston, who was like fourth all time after 2 years of most yards for a freshman sophomore. Will Fuller. You look at Durham Smythe, the tight end was drafted. You had Mike McGlinchey on the offensive line. Steve Elmer would have been drafted if he didn't, quit football after his junior year. You look at Hunter Bivens started games from that class. Colin McGovern started games from that class. You had Isaac Rochelle, who was drafted out of that class. Eddie Vanderdoes was drafted out of that class. Jalen Smith was drafted out of that class. Would have been a first-round pick if not for his issues. I still believe if Max Redfield doesn't get in trouble, he probably gets drafted just on his athleticism alone. If he didn't have the off-the-field stuff, I think Max gets drafted. Elijah was 2012. You had Cole Luke in that class. That was a heck of a class. I mean, that class added a lot of – we talk about how the 2015 team was Notre Dame's most talented team. Well, the 2013 class provided a lot of that talent that we look at from that 2013, that 2015 roster. So for me, it's still 2013. 2022, I will say this, was the most balanced class of Kelly's tenure. And I will say this, if they don't fall apart and lose the receivers at the end, I think that class could have had a chance to compete if you're just looking at how they were as high school players, right? Because Will Fuller wasn't considered as good as Tobias Merriweather and C.J. Williams coming out of high school, right? So if you just look at them as recruits, I would say that the 2022 class had a chance to be the best. Before that, the best class they had, I'll probably have to go back. I'd probably have to go back to Ryan. I think it was it the 03 class? I think it was the 03 class was a great Notre Dame class as well. And again, this is more looking at what it became, not what it was. Because again, it was before I didn't really study recruiting classes back then. I was just getting into college coaching and all that. But that class had Brady Quinn at quarterback, Travis Thomas at running back, who ended up becoming starting linebacker, John Carlson at tight end, Jeff Samardzija, Chinedum Ndukwe, who's an NFL player.
Yep.
It had Tom Zibikowski, John Sullivan, NFL player, Ryan Harris, NFL player. You had Trevor Laws, NFL player. Victor Abiamiri was a 5-star. And you had Freddie Parrish, who's a top 100 player, and Ambrose Woodson. So going to, I think that was the class. And then, of course, the 2008 class was probably pre-Kelly. That was probably the best Notre Dame class from a recruiting standpoint, I would say, because that class had, just as a recruiting class, you had a receiver, you had Michael Floyd, 5-star, Deion Walker, you had Kyle Rudolph, 5-star, Joseph Fourier was in that class. He's an NFL player. Jonas Gray, Dane Chris was a 5-star recruit. Offensive line-wise, you had Trevor Robinson, who was a top 100 recruit. Lane Cleveland was a 4-star. Braxton Cave was a 4-star on offense. Then on defense, you had Darius Fleming, who was a 4-star, top 100 guy, NFL player. Steve Filer was a top 100 caliber player. Sean Swinar was a top 150 guy. Ethan Johnson was a top 100 guy. Capron Lewis Moore was a top 100. Was not highly ranked, but ended up becoming a good player. Robert Bland, Jamor Slaughter, and I'll still say this: if that class had Robert Blanton, Jamor Slaughter, and Dan McCarthy. If Dan McCarthy, and I know Notre Dame coaches who feel this way too, if Dan McCarthy doesn't have all the injuries, he would have been the best of that secondary group. People thought he was special because he was a great athlete, but he got hurt immediately. So he just had multiple injuries when he got to Notre Dame, but he was a special athlete. So I'd say that probably is the only other class that could rival that 13 class in regards to what it was coming out of high school, in my opinion. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Ryan.
No, like I said,
because a lot of that's before your time.
Yes,
if that's before my time, it's definitely before your time.
It's pretty cool hearing that 2003 class, though, man. I just got flashbacks like Zibikowski, Abiamiri, Trevor Laws, like it's
Samardzija, awesome. John Carlson. Yeah. Ryan Harris and John Sullivan. That was a heck of a class.
John Sullivan was a damn good center for a while in the NFL too.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Ty was like, because that's a class Ty put together after the 2002 season. And then the next two classes were just garbage. Absolute garbage. Jim K with Super Chat. Hey, guys, great show. Thank you, Jim. What current offensive lineman do you believe stands to improve the most under Coach Hiestand, and what? It's a good question.
I mean,
let's go with veterans. Let's go because every young player's got to improve a lot, right? So I think so let's say what non-rising sophomores would you throw in that group?
Non-rising sophomores. I mean, one would be, I was going to say Patterson, but I'm going to leave him out. You know who I'm excited about? I don't know if this is weird. Like, I don't know if people are going to disagree with this. I'm excited for him to work with Andrew Kristofic. I don't know why, man, but I think Andrew Kristofic has a really nice blend of athleticism and flexibility. I think he's got developing power still. Like, I think that there's untapped potential with Andrew Kristofic. So I'm excited to see what Coach does with him.
Andrew was always a guy that I thought had the highest ceiling of that 19 class.
Talented kid,
but he was raw, right? That was the thing. Is like he was a basketball player. He was kind of more of a defensive lineman early. It's like offensive line came late. Then he shows up at Notre Dame, and you've got a no line coach that doesn't know how to develop players. I mean, he just doesn't. Yeah. And there's a reason when you lost all the hairy guys, you immediately became what they became this year, right? Like Oklahoma's never had that big of a drop off when they lose 4 offense, and they've had them. They've had years. Remember the year they had Cody Ford and they lost like 4 starters from that unit. The next year they went out, still rushed for 200 yards a game. Now they weren't as good as they were the year before, but they were still good. Notre Dame went from really good to crap on offensive line for the most part. And I don't think the young guys like Zeke Correll, he was one that kind of pops in my head. Tosh Baker would be one because I think he was so raw.
Sure.
He was never coached. The problem for Tosh is it's just he's now going to get passed up by Joe Walton, Blake Fisher.
It's going to be tough.
It's going to be tough there. But I like the Kristofic one. That's because when you take the young guys out, right, he is one that I say, boy, that I like that one because I think the power part, we haven't seen him play with the power he's capable of, in my opinion, because of how he was coached. Here's the other thing about Andrew Kristofic. Here's something I've been told. Andrew's a kid that needs a little bit of a kick in the butt.
Okay.
And I don't think Jeff Quinn was capable of that. I think Andrew Kristofic, being a Pittsburgh kid, is going to really like the fact that Harry crushes him all the time. And I don't mean like just on. I think he needs that. I think there's so much untapped potential for him, to your point, Ryan, that with the coach that's going to always be on him and pushing him and just really getting on him. I think he's the guy that, to your point, that you could see wow, he was just a solid, serviceable player last year that could go to, wow, where'd that kid come from? I think you're right.
I just remember him when he was, because he's a Pine Richland kid, right? Coming out. And I remember he was like because I remember, I think he was only like 260, 270 pounds coming out, right? And he was just like a really nice athlete. And I remember, you could have sold me him coming out like that he would have been a future left tackle at Notre Dame because of his foot quickness and just the talent level he has. And obviously fitting inside now, if he's able to, develop that power a little further and he's able to, hone the craft as far as hand placement and ability to finish and all those nuances of playing offensive line, the talent's easy in my opinion to see. So I'm excited. He's one of the guys. Jared Patterson is one that I also think is, he's only going to have him for a year. So it's, it's going to be a little bit of a, quick turnaround, obviously. But if Jared Patterson's been as good as he has being developed under Coach Quinn, I would just want to see what he is with a year under Coach Sheehan. I think that it could be revolutionary for him.
Because technically, like you said, Jared's got 1 year left. Yeah. Technically, Andrew Kristofic could have 3.
Right.
Because of the COVID year. He could have 22, 23 would be his normal fifth year, and then 24 would be his 6th year. Now, I think if Harry Hiestand does the job that with Kristofic that you and I are thinking could happen, I don't think he comes back for a 6th year. I think he's going to be at that point be a 3-year starter essentially, and he'd be in the Aaron Banks. Because Aaron Banks wasn't a 3-year starter per se, but he started half of a 2nd year. Because we've talked about how the 3rd year is when we've seen Harry Hiestand linemen really take off, right? Like Q was really good in 15. He was really good in 16. He became an all-world guy in 17. McGlinchey was, 15 was pretty good. 16 was solid. 17 really took off. That's just kind of was the year that we saw with all these Notre Dame kids. We saw that Liam Eichenberg, his 3rd year in the starting lineup. He went and became a great player, and I think that was also an offseason where he spent a lot of time with Harry Hiestand. So I think that would be the thing too, is that 5th year for Andrew Kristofic would be basically his 3rd year in the starting lineup, although it'd be only number 2 for Harry Hiestand. So that's an interesting one. Florida Irishman says, I watched an interview with Dante Moore and I fear we are trailing 2 to 3 schools. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are that people, I would not put a lot of stock in those interviews because you're answering the questions that you're being asked.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, because like somebody said something like, I watched an interview with Jason Moore and it was the same person I think that interviewed Dante Moore, I think. No, Adam Gorney interviewed Dante Moore. It was like, well, it seemed to talk a lot about Penn State. Well, you watch the interview because he's being asked. It's not being asked about Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's more of a rivals issue than it is Notre Dame's not. Just look, I'm not saying they're going to get him for sure. I like where Notre Dame is at. I would much rather be in Notre Dame's shoes than anybody else's shoes. And I don't know how many more ways I can say that, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I mean, just again, we'll reemphasize this. I actually did listen to this, just a little snippets, and it's the same thing that you're saying. It's, again, can only answer the questions that you're asked. Right. And I didn't even though, obviously there was some whatever, I didn't leave that interview feeling any differently. Cause right. Obviously I have a little bit of a different, understanding of of his recruitment, but still like there was nothing in there that I thought was like, oh man, that's not good type of thing. So they're fine. They'll be okay. It'll work itself out. Yeah. We'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Ben Tarnowski, what are your thoughts on Jaden Daniels in the portal? Ryan, I'm asking you this one. What are your thoughts on Jaden Daniels in the portal? Big potential, but is he overrated or was it a poor system? Is your opinion? Is he worth pursuing or stick with who we have? So I'm going to answer for both of us. I don't think either of us want Notre Dame to pursue Jaden Daniels, correct? So let's take that part out because I think the rest of it is an interesting thing. I'd like to get your thoughts on. Is your thoughts on him? Does he have big potential? And if you were a team that needed a quarterback, okay, would he be a guy that you would pursue? Why or why not? So that's where I wanted to focus on because I think it's a good question if you take the Notre Dame piece out of it.
It's bad times right now in Arizona State, man. It's not looking great right now. Jaden Daniels is very talented. Like he's 6'3", got a big arm, really nice athlete. He's had a difficult time putting on weight. I think he played his freshman year at 165, 170 pounds. He's only up to 185 pounds.
So he doesn't look that much bigger now.
No, he's like 185 max. So like he still needs to bulk up, but there is absolutely potential. Again, arm strength, athleticism. There is a lot of things behind the scenes from it, just structurally, and that program that was holding it back a little bit. And then also the talent on the field is they were Rashad White, who's a nice running back, but the offensive line's average. The wide receivers aren't great. They had the abbreviated season 2 years ago. That didn't help his development at all. So there's certainly upside to a Jaden Daniels. And if I was a team that needed a quarterback, yes, I would be in the market 100%. Notre Dame, nope, not the right fit in my opinion, but he's a very talented quarterback. You could definitely sell me on him having a future somewhere for sure. Yes.
I think that the other thing too is in 2019, he had Rob Likens as his offensive coordinator. I think Rob Likens is a good offensive mind. Then they went to Zach Hill from Boise, who I don't think much of, to be completely honest with you. And to your point, all the things you mentioned are true. I think the other thing that hurt him is only playing 4 games as a sophomore because of COVID.
Yeah.
I think that hurt his development as well. But I think he's got a super live arm. He is not accurate at all. But when you watch him play, it's all technical stuff.
Yes.
It's all, let me rephrase, it's all correctable technical stuff. If Jaden Daniels goes to a place with good quarterback coaching, I would say yes. And I'll say this. If Tyler Buckner, let's just say Tyler had a devastating injury and he couldn't play this year, I would absolutely at least have a conversation. Now, I don't know if Jaden Daniels would be a fit at Notre Dame and all that. I've heard some things about the mom and, but like if Jaden Daniels was a fit at Notre Dame, could get into school and Tyler Buckner was out, I would absolutely look at Jaden Daniels. He's a very talented kid. And I think he's a guy that Tommy Rees, he would flourish under Tommy Rees because there would be some structure. He would be allowed to, they throw a ton of deep balls and the offensive line stinks. And he's a kid that if you're a quarterback needy team and you still need a guy, that's the guy that you need to go for. And I guarantee you there's some coaches that have taken transfers that are like, man, why didn't this kid jump in the portal a month ago? I'd rather have him than the kid we took.
Right. So, and that happens more than you think, man. I talked to a director of a pro liaison for a school one time who was, I was just like, hey, this one quarterback entered the portal, just so you know, type of thing. And he's like, we already signed a kid, unfortunately. So like that stuff happens, man. Yeah. But to your point, Jaden Daniels' arm is live, man. Like there's talent there. He's an NFL level talent. He has not been developed properly, and he's a very nice athlete as well. There is a lot to like. So for a team that has structure, yes, bring him in because he has, like you said, he was a true sophomore last year during an abbreviated season. So that means that he would still have been a sophomore eligibility this year. So he still has 2 more years potentially. Like it's not just a one and done type of situation too. And he might even be graduating. I'm not sure exactly what his graduation status is.
Be curious.
So we'll see.
Because his third year, he's an early enrollee. I thought they used him too much as a runner this year. True. I think he's more of a kid that's a passer that can run, and they try to turn him into a runner that can pass. That's something else that I think has hurt Jaden the last 2 years that I don't think would have been true if Rob Likens was still the offensive coordinator. I think they would have used him differently. So, yes, he's a kid that I'm very encouraged by. I did want to address this. Scott McDonald called on with IB after the finish of the 21 season. Since you guys aren't a fan of the TV coverage, do you or have you considered doing live watch-alongs to interact with fans during games? The problem is we couldn't play the game during this show. There's legal things there. The other part of it is The other part of it is we write articles. We're working during the game too, so it'd be hard for me to kind of do that. We've looked into maybe doing some things with Blue Wire down the road where we would do something like that for non-Notre Dame games, which would be kind of fun. But with Notre Dame games, because we're working, we're writing articles, I'm tracking stuff. It'd be hard for me to engage with you all in a way that's fun and enjoyable and worth your time while also working and putting out content. So maybe down the road, if we've grown enough and Ryan's carrying enough of my, carrying the site enough and doing all those kind of things that I can kind of do some of that fun stuff. But right now it's just not. It's something we've thought about. There's so many roadblocks to being able to do something like that. And honestly, we could do it, but we couldn't make money off of it. And with all due respect, I mean, this is still my business. I still have a mortgage to pay and salaries to pay now to people who have mortgages to pay. So it just, there's some things we're going to do at Irish Breakdown on the premium board that we don't monetize directly, but that's one of those things on game day. I mean, game day is a big money maker for us. I mean, it's just, we try to put out a lot of content. There's a lot of eyes on it. And right now, it's just not in the cards. I hope down the road. Now, there are some people trying to do some things where they're signing contracts would allow you to kind of do, because they see the popularity of Ian, the Mannings and stuff doing that stuff. That'd be fun to do. That'd be a lot of fun to do if there was a way to monetize it and legally do it when we're not getting in trouble and getting strikes on our YouTube channel because we've put something copyrighted on there.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, the Manning cast could be the Driscoll cast.
There you go. No, it'd be the IB cast because it's not about me. It'd be about us. It's about all of our knowledge and it being fun. So, if you notice, I don't have any shirts that say Driscoll on it, or it's about Irish Breakdown, because Irish Breakdown for a while was just me on the site, but the goal has always been to make Irish Breakdown about a collection of very talented people. And I feel like if I were to put the Driscoll thing on there, although throw the boss some love.
It's catchy. It's catchy.
It takes away from their talent, which is why I didn't put my name in the company, like some people originally told me to. So yeah, like we did when we first started podcast, it was Irish Breakdown with Brian Driscoll. That's about as far as I go with putting my name on stuff. But yeah, anyway. David Solomon says, I hope Brian is right and I'm wrong. If we go 11-1 for the next 4 years, and we're more than likely on the outside looking in every year, if there are 4 Power 5 undefeated conference champs. This is the whole problem with that. You're using the most extreme, has never happened before examples of, okay, if there are 4 13-0 Power 5 conference champions, yeah, Notre Dame's going to be out those years. Right? But when has that ever happened though, David? Right? That I think the most we've seen is 3. Right? I mean, we've never had 4 undefeated teams in the playoff, correct? Not once. And matter of fact, we've had more years with no undefeated teams than we've had with 3 undefeated teams. Because in 2017, there wasn't a single undefeated team in the playoff, right? I think in 2019, there were 3 undefeated teams. I think Ohio State was undefeated in 19, and I think Clemson was undefeated in 19. I believe. We know LSU obviously was. But 2018, we had 3 undefeated teams, I believe. Alabama was undefeated. Clemson was undefeated, barely, and Notre Dame was undefeated. But that was only 2 conference champions that were undefeated because Notre Dame wasn't a conference champion. Oh, so Oklahoma had a loss that year. And so in the scenario in which there are 4 13-0 Power 5 conference champions, yes, Notre Dame's going to be out. In the unlikelihood of that ever happening, you're correct. But I'm going off, David, of my argument to you is, let's look at what has actually happened, right? We've had 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We have 8 college football seasons, right? Since the playoff has started. Notre Dame has made the playoff in 2 of them. Okay. Once they were undefeated, once they were not undefeated. In 2 of the other years, so that's half the years, Notre Dame climbed up into the top 4, but dropped out because of a loss or poor play. So in half the years, Notre Dame with a loss, 3 of the 8 years, Notre Dame with a loss has climbed into the top 4 with a loss. So evidence would show that this notion that Notre Dame has no margin for error, there's no actual basis in fact right? And that's all we can deal with, right? We could talk about what if. Hey, Ryan, what if there's that year where all 5 Power 5 teams are undefeated? Is Notre Dame going to make it in if they're have one loss? Probably not.
Yeah.
But when does that ever happen? I'm just going off, David, of what we've seen. And you can hope that I'm right. I think we all hope that I'm right. But, I mean, I've already been proven that I'm right. Because last year, Notre Dame made it with a loss. Notre Dame lost by 24 points the day before the committee made their decision. I mean, how much more evidence do you need? And they took Notre Dame over an undefeated Cincinnati team. So I don't know what more data you need to realize that the committee views Notre Dame far more favorably. This is the funny thing. A lot of Notre Dame fans talk rightly about how Notre Dame gets a negative, ESPN's not fair. There's a lot of anti-Notre Dame bias. The one national entity, in my opinion, Ryan, you tell me if you agree or disagree with this, that has been very pro Notre Dame has been the College Football Playoff Committee. They've been very pro Notre. You could argue they didn't deserve to be number 5 this year. Before you could argue they're number 4 based on who they beat, which is no one, right? I mean, so I would argue that the College Football Playoff Committee has been the one pro Notre Dame entity that has existed, in my opinion. I don't know what your thoughts on that, Ryan.
We went into the championship weekend, and I was shocked. I'm like, wow, there only needs to be like 2 things to happen in Notre Dame to stick into this playoffs.
With like 0 wins over top 25 teams.
Right. And everybody knew, 11-1, that's great or whatever. But Notre Dame didn't deserve to be in that position, but they were still potentially there because Notre Dame is recognized, right? And the playoff committee recognized still.
Right.
So
right. So they are respected by the playoff committee. I don't buy the notion that they have to be. Hey, let's not forget, too, Notre Dame with 1 loss got in over an SEC team with 1 loss. Let's not forget that either in 2020. So that would be Texas A&M. So I don't accept the premise because there's no if there was evidence to support that, then I would say, they need to do this because this is the evidence of that has been the case, but that evidence just hasn't been there. Mike Nolan with Super Chat, why all the vitriol at Tommy for being petty? I assume that relates to the Parker hire. Didn't see any evidence of that at the presser. Mike, my theory is that Tommy Rees is catching a lot of arrows from people who would like to throw them at Brian Kelly, but he's not here to take them anymore.
That's gotta throw him at someone.
That's mine. He's the holdover from the BK era, and I think he's taken and I think there's I think there's still people that think because he wasn't this as a player, that means he's not this as a coordinator, and I think those things are irrelevant. So that's Mike, that's the only thing I can come up with. And as far as the petty to Parker thing, I mean, an assistant coach didn't agree with who the head coach wanted. I think that's being turned into this drama soap opera thing that stuff happens all the time. I guarantee there are times when Marcus Freeman as a coordinator had a coach that was hired that he didn't want to be the guy and he wasn't happy about it. I guarantee that's happened. That's happened to almost every coordinator in the history of college football. Because at the end of the day, you're going to give a lot of freedom, but sometimes the head coach is like, nope, that's the guy that I want. Look, I know for a fact there were guys on staff in 2017 that Mike Elko didn't want. I know for a fact that there were guys during Clark Lee's tenure on staff that he didn't necessarily want. Fact, 100% certainty. But the difference is now those things are being reported for whatever reason. And I think Tommy's catching the brunt of that. And there's this assumption that he's just being petty. No, I mean, an offensive coordinator once it's like hey, if I'm going to cook dinner, I want to be able to go shop for the groceries, right? I mean, that goes back to Bill Parcells saying that. I mean, it's no different than an NFL head coach wanting to be able to make personnel decisions. So I don't think it's the issue that people are making it out to be. There are far more things I'm concerned about with Tommy Rees than that. Now, do I think maybe he shouldn't have expressed those things to people that are just going to go run and report it? Maybe maybe he needs to think better about that. But I think this is being turned into something that it's not. Now, if he was complaining about all these things and he was threatening to leave, if you don't hire, okay, that's crossing the line that okay, I'm the head coach. And if you want to leave because I want to hire this guy, then you can leave. But if it was that, but I've never heard that it was that. And so Sean and I will talk about that also a little bit more tomorrow. Here's one for you, Ryan, from Felix Fournier. Ryan, which cute quarterback in the 2023 class is most likely to see a Drew Aller-like rise in the rankings during his senior season?
Interesting question. So, Brian, do you remember originally, because I know obviously Aller, the rise he's talking about, do you remember where he was originally kind of like throughout the process? Because I know he rose to what? He was like a probably around 100, top 100 type of player, right?
He was unranked at going into his senior season. He was unranked. Yeah. Which I think was a misevaluation. I mean, everybody here knows I love Drew Eller, but he was unranked. I think initially he was even a 3-star on Rivals and then went to a 4-star and then jumped up. So, so I'm looking at the Rivals. The first time he jumped into a top 250 for Rivals was he jumped up to number 195 last September. Now, I believe 247 bumped him up much sooner than that.
Okay.
So, and again, part of this was COVID, shortened seasons and different things. So, not getting to camps and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was a unique situation.
Yeah. And Felix, I feel like I just haven't gone deep enough into the quarterbacks to have a good answer, right? Like I've stuck to what the Notre Dame board looks like and offers that they have kind of lent to the 2023 class. So might need a little more of an evaluation of some guys before I have an educated, right? Because outside of the Chris Vizzinas of the world, the Jackson Arnolds of the world, the Avery Johnson of the world, I haven't dove much into what the other quarterbacks look like. I've just kind of been really, tunnel vision to who Notre Dame's eyeing, who Notre Dame looks at, that type of thing.
Right.
So.
And I think a couple guys have already started to see that rise. I think Chris Vizzinas one. I mean, he was a 3-star not that long ago. His is just happening a little. Yeah, right. Now it's happening a little bit sooner. Ricky Collins is a guy that I like a lot from Louisiana that's seeing a rise sooner. So I think COVID is why Drew Aller's rise happened so much later. And I think so. Normally that happens kind of in this, the lead up to his senior year. But I think Vizina is probably the best case in this class, but it's just starting sooner. And if a guy's going to make that kind of rise, I mean, like Ryan said, I mean, Notre Dame's offered a bunch of dudes, so they haven't given us a chance. Even a guy like Avery Johnson's considered like a top 250 guy already, So and he's a raw kid on the board, so. Right. I don't really know of any guys. I think that Marcus Stokes kid that Notre Dame offered recently is a kid that could maybe be that because he's like a 3-star, like way down there. But I still there's a lot I need to see from him, the kid from Florida. A couple more here. Sean S. shot the 23 offensive haul can get remote. The shot that the 2023 offensive haul can get remotely close to the defensive haul. Can they round this thing out beyond Moore and Tate? It's a good question.
It is a good question. I mean, so in theory, right, if Notre Dame lands a Dante Moore, then there's that snowball effect where there is a Carnell Tate that moves along, and then Harry Heastain handles his business on the offensive line side of things. You can get close. I don't know if you would ever get there, right? Because, I mean, still, the defensive class is so far ahead right now, and there's just so many. I mean, again, Keon Keeley, 5-star. And there's other guys on the defensive side of the ball. We talked about Samuel Mpemba earlier, right? Like they're in play for some highly rated guys still on the defensive side of the ball. So I think, Sean, to answer your question, though, Notre Dame definitely can close the gap big time. I don't know if they can necessarily overtake defense just because they're just off to such a good start, and they're still on a couple of those highly ranked guys still.
Right. If the defensive class, the only way for me, no matter how good the offensive finishes, I think the only way the offense could catch the defense is if the defense finishes with no one on the same caliber of what they have now. So, like, they can't get Jason
if they were
Moore,
done.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if they just kind of, like, instead of getting
Level
Jason Moore,
out.
they get, like, a Brooks Barr, right? Yeah. Like, because I would say there's a chance, it's going to be tough, but there's a chance that Notre Dame could legitimately finish with Dante Moore, Carnell Tate, Rodney Gallagher, Braylon James, Samson Okunlola, I think, is the best shot I have at pronouncing that, Monroe Freeling, and Charles Jagasaw. I don't – if the defensive class just kind of bats 50-50 on the top guys on the board, get a Jason Moore and a Devin Houston. Don't get Malik Muhammad, but get Christian Gray. Don't get Caleb Downs, but get a Ryan Yates or a King Mack or something like that. I still think the defensive class is a little bit better, but it's close. And that would simply be because the defensive class is so great. That's a heck of an offensive class.
It is. Yeah,
I mean, really and you could, and someone could come in here and argue that the offensive class is better at that point. I'd say, yeah, I'm not going to argue with you about it. It'd be close enough to where it's like, I'm not going to, like, sometimes I'm like, hey, look, I just think you're wrong, and I'm going to defend my point of view. I'm like, yeah, okay, I could see why you think that. I think this way, but I can see why you think that. that'd be one heck of an offensive class. But I think if you were then to put in value into this conversation, not just pure rankings, that's when you can make a case that the offensive class is better, because the value of getting the quarterback and getting the impact receivers, the needs were even bigger there than maybe some of these other positions.
That's fair.
But if they get like a Jason Moore and a Malik Muhammad, it's ball game over. No one's in the country is going to have a better side of the ball than what the Notre Dame defense would have. I mean, or Malik Muhammad or a Caleb. I mean, they get those guys. I mean, goodness great. They already have 5 top 100 kids in there. I mean, two composite 5-star players. I mean, there aren't a whole lot. Alabama signed 3 5-stars in the composite ranking last year. That's it. Mm-hmm. I mean, and they had number 2 class in the country. Mm-hmm. So that's a heck of a class. Sean S., and thank you for the super chat, and thank you for this super chat, Sean. Brian, how many hours does a head coach like Marcus Freeman work a week in a season and off season? Curious how involved the grind really is. I mean, so let's count that working isn't always just sitting behind a desk. Working sometimes is at home texting recruits while you're waiting on dinner or watching a movie. I would say coaches spend a minimum, I would say 10 hours a day working in some capacity. And during the season, it's probably more. Again, when you consider what goes in, because like if you work a 9 to 5, and Ryan's learning this at this job, right? Like you don't have hours. You just have, I got to get this done. And sometimes it may take 4, sometimes it may take 14, right? I mean, so sometimes working is like, Ryan was a teacher before, right? I'm sorry. I don't know if I could have said that or not.
No, you're fine. Yep.
So he had to be at school by this time and school day was over then, and you go home and it is what it is. This job, if he had an office to go to, he'd do his job 9 to 5, and then he'd come home and he'd be working another 4 or 5 hours texting kids. And I mean, that's just kind of how the job is, right? And that's how coaching is even more so. So even when you're home, you're still on the clock. I mean, when I was a coach, my wife can attest to this. You get phone calls at 2:00 in the morning from a player who's in jail. You know what I mean? Like you're working, you're on the clock, you're never off the clock. So you can't say, hey man, I'm off the clock, call back in the morning. You're getting up and you're going and you're bailing your player out, or you're doing whatever you need to do. So, I mean, minimum 10, would you say, is that fair, Ryan? During the off season, you'll get a little bit more time on the weekends to your family, but during the week, I mean, you're on. Yeah. It's a big time grind.
It's a grind, man.
Yeah. Now the best to me, you can put in a 14-hour day and not get a lot done. You can put a 9-hour day in and get a lot done. I think you got to be able to find that balance too as a coach. Say, what can I do from home? Am I working just to work at this point in time? I do think sometimes coaches aren't as efficient as they need to be with what they do. And that's what leads to 14, 15-hour days, in my opinion. So that's just a chance there.
Work smarter, not harder.
That's right. Yep. Exactly. Hey, Killander, any chance of the bus, Jerome Bettis being a student assistant, and what is the time of, and what is maybe kind of like, I don't know, about James Laurinaitis. I'm not quite sure what that means, Hank. I'm sorry. I don't think Jerome Bettis is overly concerned with being a coach for the reasons we just mentioned. Jerome is a businessman now, and that's what he's doing. And that's why he's in school. He's in school now to get a business degree from Notre Dame because he's got a lot of businesses going. And I think there's value for him, not just completing the degree. I think there's a sense of, I want to complete this. But there's also a sense of like, I want to complete this at Notre Dame where, I'm going to get a degree from one of the best business programs in the country because he's got that on his mind. I don't see Jerome Bettis. I would love to see him around a team. Marcus Freeman said he talks to him a couple times a week. I want to definitely see him around the team. I hope he's at practices, but as far as coaching, I don't. Because what's a student assistant do? They run and spot the ball between drills. Like they go get the bags. I mean, Jerome Bettis isn't holding a bag for the running backs. You know what I mean? So like, I don't think that's going to happen. And I also think that this would be a bad time to do this because I think when you insert Jerome Bettis into the room with Dylan McCullough, it's going to take away a little bit from Dylan McCullough establishing his I'm the coach kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that would be if Dylan was already established, it would make more sense. But I think I personally, if I was in Dylan McCullough's shoes, I'd say, hey, I want Jerome Bettis around. I think he'd be a phenomenal asset. But him coaching, well, who am I taking instruction from? My coach or the Hall of Fame running back? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think
too many voices.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a huge role, and I think this is a great way to. I think we'll probably end it here, Ryan. Ryan, do you have a similar prospect crush on Jaden Greathouse as me.
Well, Zach, I don't know quite what your crushdom is on Jaden, but I will say that I've been enamored with his film since I watched it a couple weeks ago. He just very nuanced for a junior in high school, man. Like, I don't know what better way to put it. Like, as a route runner, it's one of the better I've seen on the high school level. And he just kind of has an understanding for how to attack blind spots and just get in and out of his breaks cleanly, set up defenders. 6'2", 206. So he's got a big frame. He can win above the rim. And this is Jaden Greathouse out of Texas for people that don't know. And he's Westlake High School. They just went 16-0. They actually beat Denton Geyer in the state championship game this past season. So he, 66 catches, over 1,200 yards, 20 touchdowns, had 230 on 7 catches and 3 touchdowns against Geyer in the state championship game. So he's a really good football player, man. And Brian brought up a good point before. It's like, how much of an upside is there with a kid that's that refined already at that age, which is a solid point and definitely, valid type of conversation. But I think what you're seeing just as a baseline floor, the kid can play, man. Really good football player.
Yep, agree. We do have a super chat I need to get to before we get out of here. Brandon Plesner says, can someone explain to me what the Irish Players Club is exactly? I've seen the Twitter initiative online, but still trying to figure out what it is exactly. You and me both. Basically, from what I can tell, it's an NFT. Essentially, you give money, you get things in return, and some of that is access to certain things with players, and that money is then distributed. 75% of that money is distributed to the players. I personally think it should be more, but looks like Mick is trying to make himself some dough off the backs of his teammates, which I guess is fine. I just, whatever. I wish there was someone that could have negotiated a bigger cut from that with him, but that's one of the drawbacks of this is you don't have that. But Ryan, that's the best I can figure is that's about the best I can explain at this point in time. Is it's a collective of money that's dispersed to the players through some. I guess they have to do things to earn it. Like they have to do this to get some of it. They have to do that to get some of it. It's not just like we get the money and we're handing out checks to the different. You get this. There has to be some sort of transactional thing going on. You get a community thing. You meet with a person that gave a certain. It's strange. It's a very slippery slope. I personally don't like it. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is name, image, and likeness. This is just a fundraiser, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah.
I guess.
Nah, I simply don't know enough about it to have a. Yeah, I think you summed that up the best way you could. I don't have anything really to add because it's just I'm not educated enough on the topic to have a general understanding. I guess.
And that was even me listening to Marcus Freeman try to explain it last night in that in that video. So yeah, I don't. Yeah, Brandon, I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. And to be honest with you, I don't really care to have Mick Assif on to explain it. I just have some issues there. So, I'm against the whole notion of it. I mean, if it's allowed, Notre Dame needs to take advantage of it, right? That I don't have an issue with that. I have an issue with the entire premise of that. It's just a fundraiser that you're handing out money. Hey, you guys give money. It's pay for play, essentially, in my opinion, is the way I look at it. And I don't like that. If you want to go I think with this whole NIL thing, there needs to be a transaction. Hey, you do this for me. You promote this product for me, and I'm going to pay you this amount of money. You rock these shoes, and I'm going to pay you this. Just like online, social media influencers, right? Like, hey, you promote 5 times a week. I have this deal with Built Bar. We give a promo code, we push the show, and we get a certain amount of the profit proceeds of the money that people use a promo code, right? I mean, there's a transaction there. I'm fine. Hey, you rock our sweaters and put them out on social media, and we'll pay you X amount. I think there should be some sort of give and take there. That's what you're making money off your name, image, and likeness. Just putting a bunch of money into a big pool that you then distribute to players how you see fit is not what I value, in my opinion. So that's just kind of my thing. Real quick question before we wrap up. Tom, Brian, I can't find my discount code. How do I contact you? Brian at irishbreakdown.com. Tom, just shoot me an email and email me from the email you use to sign up. So that way I can find your find your information and then get you that code. So that is definitely the way to get a hold of me. So thank you so much, everybody. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share our podcast, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. A ton going on. And of course, make sure that you are ready to listen to our show tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Sean and I will be there to talk about the coaching staff. And then Ryan and I will be back on Monday for the recruiting hour, and a lot going on. But that's why you need to hit the notification bell, because we may just decide to do a show at some point in time, and you need to find out when that show is going to be. So Ryan, great show today. Great stuff, buddy. I really appreciate it. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for being a part of Super Chat just popped up. Dan Muller, thank you for that Super Chat. 0% chance that Notre Dame goes after Jay.
All said. Yeah.
And I just encourage you, we did talk about a little bit ago, so if you got in here late, we did talk about what we like about Jaden Daniels, but we just don't see Notre Dame being a school that's going to pursue him at this point in time, especially with us not knowing if he's a graduate or not. So anyway, thank you for that Super Chat, though, Dan. I wanted to get that in before we took off, because if you give us some of your hard-earned money, we feel that you deserve to have your voice heard. And when we don't do that, it's usually because we just miss it. We apologize. It's never personal. So anyway, Ryan, everybody, thanks for the show today. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow. Thanks so much for being a part of the Irish Breakdown